kidnapped from the slums, turned into a chimera, used as a living weapon until even his mind started breaking, and the moment he stopped being useful, they threw him away like trash. But instead of dying, he came back as a human, while still carrying all that monstrous power. Instead of taking revenge or going back to hunting, he builds a quiet life in a demon realm, makes friends and grows mandrakes. Peace isn't given, it's built, and he enjoys it to the fullest. The story began with a small snake named Sasa, who met 3 radishes face to face inside a gate in the demon realm. A battle ensued, watched by Ubeom and Ujia. She asked who would win this time. He replied that the outcome was obvious. She remarked that the battle was quite fierce today, however. Suddenly, the radishes began using what Beom called a Superman punch. Sasa dodged, but the radish leaf still managed to hit its target. Afterward, the snake burst into tears and ran away. Beom exclaimed that Mandrake had won again, making it 99 wins out of 99 matches. Jia remarked that Sasa wasn't bad either. After some time, the protagonist Cheon Do-eun picked up Mandrake and remarked that he had another big fight today. He took a little moisturizer on his fingers and spread it on the radish, then thought about why he loved moisturizer so much. At this point, Kim Nari called out to her uncle, Nam Daziok, and asked how much longer she had to wait. She was already very hungry. He replied that he was almost finished. She would definitely like this dish. The girl brought him a basket of eggs and remarked that it would be a shame not to add this. Uncle agreed with her and cracked the eggs, then added them to the pans. After some time, he finished cooking and served the food on plates. Nari said that they needed to eat already. Shishyok replied that they only had to do the most important step, sprinkle it with sesame seeds. After all this work, the 2 of them called the others to the table. When everyone had gathered, the guy proudly announced that today's menu included his special sauce-based dish, special fried rice with kimchi. Nari tried the food and exclaimed in admiration that it was incredibly delicious. Jishuk replied with a smile that there was more, so let her have a second helping. Jia tasted the food and remarked that he was a good cook. He immediately became very embarrassed and replied that he was honored that even she liked his dish. At that moment, the protagonist also tasted the food, and his mandrake had already fallen asleep. After that, everyone started eating with pleasure, and Jiseok ran around in a hurry to put another portion of food for Jia. MC, watching this, smiled and wondered if life in the demon realm wasn't so bad. One day, a gate opened, and destruction descended upon the world. Fierce and cruel monsters emerged from the world later dubbed the demon realm. Then, a select few awakened as hunters. These were people who had awakened mana and gained special abilities. Thanks to them, humanity was finally able to strike back. Over time, the cities were rebuilt. Although many problems remained unresolved, at least some people could begin to enjoy normal life again. However, there were too few awakened hunters to stop the constant threat of monsters. Thus, nothing less than artificial life, the Chimera Hunter, was created. Experimental materials included the corpses of death row inmates and animals, minerals mined from the gate, and monster cells. Humanity's attempts to survive were made possible by the mass production of Chimera hunters. It was hailed as the perfect combination of the scientific and hunter communities. The mortality rate among hunters was significantly reduced, and countless lives were saved. Thus, the world seemed to be gradually returning to its former glory. Decades ago, in high-class Chimera storage facility number B18, 2 scientists descended into the room where the chimeras themselves were locked up. One of them, shining a flashlight, asked if number 17's arm was rotten. The other nervously replied, "Don't let him come near him." He said everything was fine. The chimera's brain was damaged. It wouldn't move without orders. The scientist looked at the monster, which looked very ill, and noticed that its right arm was completely crushed. Was that a side effect from the experiment? Why be so afraid of someone who couldn't even see properly? The other guy replied that they should just move on. They would get rid of him anyway. After that, they went to the lab director's office and reported that chimera number 17 was now useless. His body was too damaged. Any other chimera in his place would already be dead. The director inquired how much longer he could hold out. The scientist guessed a month at most. He then instructed them to assign him to the gate blockade operation. Have him guard the rear when the hunters began to retreat. However, they were not to give him the order to return. Sometime later, in the demon realm, specifically in the Rocky Mountain region, this same wounded chimera began a fierce battle with a demon. In an instant, it cut down the flying demon and then moved on to another opponent. The chimera leaped incredibly high and instantly sliced the demon into pieces. Afterward, it created a powerful magic ball that instantly destroyed all enemies in its path. Meanwhile, the adventurers watching this battle began to marvel at how amazing it was. He had destroyed so many monsters in a single blow. They expected nothing less from an S-class chimera hunter. One of them noted that, incidentally, there was no sign of the gate closing. Another adventurer replied that he shouldn't worry. No matter how many monsters came out of the gate, as long as they had this chimera, they would definitely hold out. They just needed to deal with the stragglers. After some time, the red gate began to disappear. The adventurer exclaimed that it was time for them to retreat and exit through the gate. At this moment, chimera number 17 continued to fight the monsters. One of the adventurers asked if they were taking him with them. The guy replied that she should forget about it. They were told not to return him. He said his lifespan was coming to an end anyway. She worriedly noted that she felt uneasy. If it weren't for him, the damage done would have been colossal. The adventurer asked, why these pointless worries? She herself knew that chimeras were practically inanimate. They only followed the orders of their masters, because they were monsters. During the battle, Chimera number 17, or rather the protagonist, had flashbacks of how the scientists told him his job was to protect the hunter's rear. Did he understand this? Nothing more was needed. This meant that once the mission was complete, he didn't need to return. Having destroyed all the monsters but sustained severe injuries, Chimera number 17 thought the mission was complete. No return permitted. That day, the results of Chimera Hunter number 17's mission, which had met its end, were as follows. Hunter deaths, 0. Total monsters destroyed 1,823. At the moment of death, an unrecorded past surfaced inside the mind of number 17. The fact that he had once been an ordinary human and was abducted at the age of 9. Beginning with that memory, a panorama of his entire life flashed before his eyes. Unfortunately, number 17's damaged brain couldn't accurately comprehend the meaning of these images. He only calmly observed his past life. 79 years ago, in an orphanage in District 13, his father held him in his arms for the first time. 70 years ago, he had scolded him for hitting a friend with a rock. Sometime later, the protagonist's own parents kicked him out, saying they could no longer allow him to live there. Then, laboratory scientists found him, took him in, and began to inject various genes into his body. The scientists gave him the number 17 and injected him with S+ silkworm larval cells, but there were no side effects. After some time, one of the scientists reported that a special ability had appeared, but his human form and personality were still intact. It was as if he possessed a unique constitution. The laboratory director instructed them to continue implanting various variants into him until a reaction was observed. 64 years ago, the protagonist became incredibly powerful, leading to him being used as a weapon against demons. 59 years ago, during another battle, he looked at the corpses of monsters and wondered why he was here. What had he just done? The laboratory director approached him and asked why he had stopped. Was his memory jumbled? Finally, the side effects began to manifest. 54 years ago, a scientist recorded that, as a result of implanting over 500 types of monster cells over 15 years, the hunter's rank had risen to at least S, a virtually immeasurable level. Number 17 is their lab's greatest success. 20 years ago, he completely lost his human form and began to be fed meat like an animal. 3 days ago, his final battle took place, after which MC thought all his missions were complete. With a total of 527 types of monster cells implanted, Chimera Hunter number 17 was reborn. After that very battle, his bones and muscles began to fuse until he once again regained his human form. The protagonist looked at his hands, from which claws still protruded, and said that, given that he still possessed the abilities from the monster cells, he couldn't say he was completely human. He thought about it, but it still felt like a long time. If the lab hadn't claimed him, then they'd gotten rid of him. The experiment number on his wrist was also gone. Would he have nothing to do with the lab anymore? If his body had become like this, it must have been due to an immortal type ability that could revive its host up to 3 times, as long as its core wasn't destroyed. But they said that humans and immortal cells couldn't fuse. It was clear that his body had returned to its peak condition. Perhaps it was because the side effects of the experiment had worn off. As soon as he'd begun to experience this, his mind had become clouded. All the orders engraved within him to prevent escape or disobedience had vanished as well. If his life as number 17 had ended, could he live it as a human? In that sense, 17 was a random number assigned by the lab. But his former name had been something else. MC remembered how his father had told him he was a bit of a psychopath when he was a child. No, more accurately, he had a rude personality. Let him try living a life of consciously helping people. Let Chonda-woon help many. Currently, the protagonist chuckled and wondered how an orphan from the slums could help anyone. His words were completely meaningless. Well, what should he do now? Maybe he should take revenge? Revenge requires a direct goal. Honestly, he felt like everything had happened a long time ago, and his desire for revenge didn't burn as brightly as it once did. In any case, he wouldn't return to the human world right now. Yes, if he lived long enough, he would meet them one day. He would think about it when the time came. Okay, he decided. How about living partly as a human now? When was the last time he wore clothes? After some time, the protagonist came to a pond and asked what he should make clothes out of. Did the material have to be durable? He needed to look around. Suddenly, he noticed a demon corpse in front of him and wondered if there had been a territorial dispute. He thought the beast was very strong. He didn't see any serious injuries. Most likely, it died from poison. Great. He needed the skin. MC created a blade from his hand and wondered if the blade would make the job easier. He should remember what he'd learned in the lab. First, a straight cut across the stomach, then cuts on the limbs. Well, he should try. While butchering the corpse, a poisonous aura began to escape from the monster. The protagonist, having taken 0 damage, said it smelled unpleasant and that he'd have to wash it. After some time, he completely removed the skin and noted that for the first time, it was not bad. After that, the protagonist began to wash the material, when suddenly the skin hardened, and he noted that it looked soft. Was it because the skin belonged to a monster? It's a very hard material, but it doesn't look like a metal plate or anything like that. In times like these, the hide is processed worked using a single method. MC laid it out on the grass and began punching it repeatedly. After a while of this, the hide became very soft. He began cutting it out and asked that the size should be about this, right? At that moment, the monster behind him woke up. The protagonist, without noticing, pierced the hide in the right places and created clothes for himself. He looked at his clothes and noticed that the poison hadn't completely washed off. He was tired of messing with them, so he'd wear them like this. At that moment, the monster fully woke up and, realizing it had no hide, began squealing. The protagonist looked at it and asked in surprise, "What, isn't he dead?" He'd definitely seen rigor mortis. He wondered if he was imagining things or if he understood what he was saying. Considering he was alive despite rigor mortis, he too must be immortal. Previously, he would have finished him off without hesitation because he was a hunter. The enemy was already weak and posed no threat. There was no need to kill him. MC smiled and said that they were both lucky. Since they had been given the chance at a second life, they should make the most of it. If fate was kind, they would meet again. After that, he simply went into the cave and thought, since he had taken care of clothes, he needed a home. Suddenly, a huge centipede appeared before him and immediately began to attack him. The protagonist, with a calm face, noted that it was too dark here. He chopped off the monster's head with a single wave of his hand and declared that this place was not suitable for him. Sometime later, the protagonist arrived in winter and, walking around the corpses of winter monsters, noted that it would be difficult to find food here, so this was not suitable. After that, he walked around several more places until he found a rocky area with a waterfall and a beautiful pool. MC thought he'd never have imagined the demon realm would be so beautiful. Now he should take a look around. He jumped down and noticed the water was clear and teeming with fish. Piranhas began jumping out of the water, clearly looking vicious. He thought they looked delicious. If he caught one and grilled it, it would be like camping. If there was a natural fish farm here, wouldn't it be a great idea to build a house nearby and live here? Flowers grow here and the air is clean, not bad. This was Do-eun's house now, and it suited him. After some time, a gate appeared in one of the clearings of the demon realm, and a robot jumped out. At this point, the protagonist remarked that it was time to begin construction. First, he needed a plot of land. With a wave of his hand, he cut down numerous trees and said that this area should be enough for a house. It was time to collect some trees in good condition. Having collected the required number, MC remarked that this was enough. Was it just him, or was the surface too uneven? He needs to fix this. With the same wave of his hand, he instantly chopped down all the stumps along with the grass, creating a perfectly level area. After that, the protagonist began to work and thought that he controlled his arms and legs as his heart told him. He will put posts in each corner. What is this called? Free will? In any case, it's fun. Maybe because this is first time building his own house? After inserting a few posts and laying the floor, the protagonist noticed that he needs to build walls. Since he doesn't have nails, he will replace it with monster snail slime. When it hardens, it will be as strong as stone, and somewhat waterproof. Well, for the finishing touches, he needs a roof. MC wrapped the ceiling in silkworm cocoon silk, and, looking at the disgusting house, said that it is very cozy. He likes it, but something is missing. He feels like something is missing. What did an ordinary human house look like? He recalled his lessons in the lab, and wondered if the educational videos he'd watched in the lab had shown people growing things in a garden. He wouldn't be able to raise a regular dog in the demon realm. Maybe he should plant a vegetable garden? But what kind of plants could he grow in the demon realm? Right. There were snowy mountains nearby. Maybe he should plant a mandrake? After some time, the protagonist arrived at the snowy mountains and thought about the mandrake's habitat, the very peak of the snowy mountains filled with mana. Incidentally, there was a lot of snow here, as expected of snowy mountains. It had also been snowing the day the lab kidnapped him. It had been so cold back then that he'd actually been glad he'd been kidnapped. Come to think of it, there were some advantages to becoming a chimera. At least he didn't have to worry about freezing to death or starving to death. In any case, judging by the mana density, he was almost there. The snowstorm also subsided. Afterwards, MC found the necessary sprouts and remarked that, fortunately, his search had not been in vain. Mandrakes are stress-sensitive monsters. Like sunfish, they can die from the slightest changes in their environment. If he was going to relocate them, perhaps younger and more adaptable ones would be better. He pulled out one sprout and wondered if they would start screaming, so he should cover his ears. When the protagonist retrieved several mandrakes, they didn't scream, as they were dormant, making strange sounds. He wondered, perplexed, what they were saying in their sleep. The widely known mandrake scream is a phenomenon that occurs when people artificially cultivate this plant. Under extreme stress in a world lacking mana, if a mandrake is forcibly pulled from the ground, it screams and dies. He assumed they weren't screaming because they were in the demon realm. But why weren't they putting up any resistance? They should be desperately trying to escape. Could it be that they'd identified him as one of their own kind? The mandrake cells were implanted in his body too. It was good they weren't under stress. MC collected a few mandrakes and wondered if later, when they were older, he should ask them for root cuttings and make tea. Oh right, he'd heard that if the fruit was forcibly harvested, it became extremely toxic. He'll have to try harder to persuade them. Suddenly, he heard the sounds of battle and noticed that hunters seemed to be nearby. He didn't know why they'd come to such a dangerous, snowy mountain, but maybe he should quickly go and retrieve the gate stone. Meanwhile, the hunters were fiercely baiting the local monsters. Kim Tae-hoon, a D-rank hunter, nervously exclaimed that they'd used them as bait and fled. Oh Sungju, his partner, told him to pull himself together. They were approaching again. Just as the monsters began to attack, the hunter created a barrier, but under such powerful attacks, the shield began to crumble. Horrified, the young man said he should have just been working part-time. Why had he ever volunteered to find the chimera? With those words, the barrier instantly collapsed. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared, his leap shrouding the surrounding area in smoke. Seeing him, Tae-hoon asked in confusion, "Is this a human?" He looked at the snow rabbit and noted that they hadn't seen each other in a while. The monsters immediately fled in fear, terrified by the terrifying aura emanating from him. Confused, Sungju asked, "Are B-class monsters running away just because they see him?" Tae-hoon rose from the ground, thanked him for saving him, introduced himself, and asked if he could know his name. The MC, looking around calmly, replied that his name was Do-woon. He thought he'd never heard that name before. What's with his clothes? Could it be that he's a reclusive hunter? The protagonist asked why they came here. They definitely look like D-class hunters. They didn't even know how dangerous the snowy mountains were. Tae-hoon replied that they were here for the money. They were told to capture a chimera. The reward was very substantial. According to the scientists, one of the test subjects escaped from the lab. It was a mechanized creature that had jumped through the gate during their escape. MC wondered if it was something mechanized, then they weren't looking for him. Then it was fine. He'd take the gate stone and go. He wondered where their belongings were. They hadn't come to the demon realm empty-handed, had they? No gate stone either? Songju replied that the other team members had taken everything and fled. They'd planned it all from the start. He should have noticed when the B-class hunter offered to join them. The protagonist wondered if they had the gate stone. Tae-hoon wondered if he was planning on returning. He should understand. They were at their limit. He, too, knew what would happen if he were poisoned by mana. He thought about how long a hunter could survive in the demon realm, depending on their level of awakening. If he didn't return to the human world to cleanse himself of the mana, he would die. Tae-hoon exclaimed, couldn't he take them with him to the human world? His pregnant wife was waiting for him at home, so he was asking him. MC sensed a strange presence and wondered if he'd found them. Then, with lightning speed, he leaped incredibly high. The hunters began pitifully screaming his name and asking, "Where is he going? Let him take them with him, please." Meanwhile, the rest of the team's hunters spotted the escaped chimera standing on the edge of a cliff. One of them shouted, "Now's their chance. Let them kill it quickly. They need to attack at once." The robot turned angrily and said that this place seemed dangerous to him. Dangerous things must be destroyed. After a while, the protagonist arrived and asked, why was he only a minute late? Looking at the bloodstains and various footprints, he thought it seemed like all the hunters had already fled. They'd even abandoned their belongings. Incidentally, there were traces of a child and an animal here. He fought while simultaneously changing his form. The protagonist remembered Tae-hoon's story about the robot, adding that this chimera was made of liquid metal and could freely change its appearance. But the materials were rare, so it was made small, about the size of a child or a dog. He now thought with a smile that the mechanized creature had single-handedly defeated 5 B-rank hunters. That impressed him. Sometime later, the 2 hunters, left alone in the snowy wilderness, were already dying. Songju, sitting by a tree, said he thought he was finished. His entire body was infected with demonic energy. Tae-hoon exclaimed, "Don't let him talk such nonsense. Does he remember that his baby will be born in just a month?" Coughing up blood, he replied, "When he gets back, tell him to tell his wife he's sorry." The hysterical boy screamed, "Hold on just a little longer. Miracles happen, don't they?" At that moment, the protagonist approached them, carrying the backpack of one of the hunter team members. Tae-hoon, overjoyed, ran to him, knelt down and shouted that he was begging him for help. He wondered in disbelief, "What is this?" "Oh, right, they said they didn't have the gate stone." Tae-hoon shouted that he knew that once a hunter loses the gate stone in the lawless demon realm, that's the end. So let him take the 2 10 million won checks that he and Songju had taken as payment for their lives. Let him please sell them 1 gate stone. If they don't return, they will definitely die. The protagonist thought he had nowhere else to spend the money. Well, he'd have money later, when he returned to the human world. After that, he gave them the gate stones, causing a portal to appear. Tae-hoon bowed his head and, thanking him, remarked that he would never forget his favor. Let Songju get up quickly. If they hurry, they might survive. The MC looked at the money and asked, "Does a gate stone usually cost around 200,000 won in the human world?" The guy helping his friend walk replied, "No, it's worth 1,000,000 won now." Why was he asking? The protagonist placed a hand on his shoulder and said he felt he'd taken too much. He'd give them this as change. After that, he instantly began pouring an incredibly powerful stream of mana into their bodies. Tae-hoon, horrified, thought, what's he releasing mana? Even A-rank hunters are reluctant to release mana. If one mana collides and entangles with another, the mana core breaks, and both people die. If this continues, they will definitely die. Suddenly, the guy felt relief and a surge of strength, and then, in shock, he exclaimed that he had been cleansed of demonic energy. Sungju hugged his comrade and shouted that they were alive. After this, the MC calmly said it was time for him to go. The hunter fell to his knees, began to bow and thank him. Tae-hoon, in incredible shock, thought that he had cleansed the demonic energy by releasing his mana. This was impossible without an incredibly large amount of mana. What kind of person was he? After some time, The protagonist returned to his almost perfect home and joyfully said that, fortunately, no one had come here. He had even been lucky enough to receive an unexpected income. He was pleased with this walk. Suddenly, the mandrakes began to make sounds and wilt a little. The MC asked if their leaves were drooping due to the long journey. He stuck the sprouts into the ground and wondered if that would be enough. Judging by the expressions on the mandrakes' faces, they were displeased. The protagonist noticed they looked miserable. What was wrong with them? Perhaps they were forcibly relocated. Or were they hungry after moving without soil? Then maybe he should give them some mana. Mandrakes usually like that. He stuck his finger into the soil and injected a small amount of mana directly into the roots of the plants, causing them to become cheerful. At that moment, the protagonist felt a strange presence and wondered if the creature the hunters had been chasing was there. What does he want from him? Well, if he has business with him, he'll come over. His thoughts turned out to be correct, because the robot was sitting in the bushes nearby. After that, MC climbed into his house, stuck money into the wall, and said he would leave the money for now, as he would need it later, and that he also needed to unpack. He began taking things out of his backpack and thought about the portable stove and a set of pots. These were essential items for cooking outdoors during hiking, camping, fishing, and so on. Next up are 8 gate stones. These allow free travel between the human world and the demon realm. There's also a change of clothes, which are contaminated with pollen. These need to be washed. And the last item is 2 sleeping bags and a blanket. These are essential for a warm night's sleep. The protagonist noted that they were well prepared, which is good for him. At the very bottom of the backpack, he found ramen and asked in surprise. The last time he ate this was when he was a child and lived in an orphanage. He was hungry, so this would be a good snack option. He'd try making it. According to the recipe, the first thing you need to do is pour 500 milliliters of water in a pot. MC approached a pond, from which aggressive piranhas immediately began jumping out. He quickly neutralized them, and noted that people usually add additional ingredients when making ramen. It would be tastier with fish. The next step, for a better taste, was to add various ingredients. For example, eggs, green onions, and so on. The protagonist climbed a tree and, finding capsules containing bird embryos, asked if they would be a good substitute for eggs, since they were caviar. After collecting the capsules, he began picking tree leaves and said that since green onions don't grow here, he thought something like this would be similar. He had prepared all the ingredients, and now it was time to go back. At that moment, the robot, watching him, was very hungry and wondered what he was cooking. After that, the protagonist placed the pot on a portable stove and said that the instructions didn't say when to add the fish. He would just boil it with the noodles. A disgusting smell began to permeate the clearing. He wondered if ramen usually smelled like this. He couldn't remember the smell at all. The robot, smelling the smell, thought that he, too, was hungry. He had observed this in the lab. People like dogs. He instantly assumed the form of a dog lame on its left leg and remarked that people help when they feel sorry for it. MC, noticing it, wondered if it was a mechanized creature. It had been following him for a long time. Had it transformed into a dog to lower his guard and was feigning injury to garner sympathy? Judging by its actions, it was very young and completely ignorant. How did such a creature manage to escape the lab and make it all the way to the demon realm? He asked if he wanted some, and the robot barked happily in response. After that, the protagonist served some less than excellent ramen to their plates, and they began to eat. After tasting the noodles, he thought the taste was just like his childhood. Dawoon was so lost in the memories of eating ramen as a 7-year-old that he didn't even notice any smells. After a while, they finished their meal. The protagonist said that if he was finished eating, he could go. He still needed to clean up. The robot started to leave, but was already limping on his right leg. He noticed this and asked with a smile, "Isn't that right? He used to limp on his left leg." The robot became very frightened, and then quickly began simulating a limp on his other leg. After some time, MC finished cleaning, went to the pond, and said that he had washed the dishes and could now start doing the laundry. He didn't remember much about the pollen, but he couldn't walk around in the same skin forever. He wasn't a caveman after all. He thought that if he hit too hard, his clothes might rip, so he needed to be careful. The protagonist tried to knock the pollen out of his clothes, but he overdid it and struck too hard. After that, he said, upset that it was okay because he had more. He looked at the robot nearby and wondered if it had turned to stone now. Why did this mechanized creature keep following him? During dinner and washing dishes, even while he admired the forsythia-like flowers, it only approached, changing its appearance, but did nothing. At one point, a bee attacked the robot, causing it to revert to its original form and flee from the insect. The protagonist reflected that his mental age was probably below 5 years old. He also had a slurred speech pattern. Forced to impart knowledge, the young chimeras shared this side effect. After some time, he finally managed to wash his clothes, and noted that washing was much more difficult than he thought. However, he managed to keep this item intact. This t-shirt looks a little small for him, but for now, he'll hang it up. Now he'll go check on the mandrake. After the protagonist left, the robot reverted to its original form, walked over to the hanger with the wet t-shirt, and putting it on, noted that the gentleman also wore clothes. And he does wear clothes. Now these clothes belong to him. After that, the robot assumed the human form of a little girl. Meanwhile, MC, seeing that the mandrakes were unwell, asked why this kept happening to them. The leaves wouldn't stop withering, and the roots were also drying out. It was strange, after all, he had pulled out all the weeds when he plowed the field. He probed the ground with a pickaxe, and finding monster worms in the soil, asked if such creatures lived there. He needed to carefully cultivate the soil. They almost died because of his mistake. He should also plant a decent vegetable garden here, approximately the size of his house. Does he think that will be enough? At that moment, a robot in the form of a girl approached him and said hello. MC wondered if it was a girl this time. Was she finally talking to him? He greeted her, slightly surprised. She pointed to the only building in the clearing and asked if this was his house. The protagonist proudly agreed. Nari asked if he was a local then. He wondered if maybe he should tease her. The protagonist agreed and asked, what tribe is she from? She started making up a story, saying she'd traveled a long way through the waterfall. She came from a very far away place. It's so far away that he wouldn't be able to find it. The MC asked that if this place is near the waterfall, does that mean she's from the coconut tribe? Nari started nodding her head and agreeing. He noticed that her clothes were very similar to his. She explained that their tribe believed that whoever takes something first is the owner. Now these are her clothes. The protagonist said she can keep it. So what brought the coconut tribe here? Nari replied that she was kicked out of the tribe. So she has one request for him. She wants to live here too. She hopes he'll let her. There are no bugs here, and there's a house here, so she feels safe here. For these reasons, she wants to live here. MC wondered if she really needed a place to rest. He agreed, and added that if she wants to stay with him, she will take on some of the work in exchange. Nari happily agreed. Let him just tell her what to do. The protagonist pointed out that he needed to tend to the garden first. Could she help with that? He needed a new home for the mandrake. The girl happily grabbed the tool from him and replied, leave it to her. She was confident in her strength. After that, she began plowing the soil incredibly quickly. The protagonist, watching this, wondered if she wasn't even trying to hide her identity, or perhaps she'd lived her whole life in a lab and didn't even know what an ordinary child was capable of. He asked, by the way, what was her name? His name was Do-woon. The girl thought she didn't have a name, so she'd make up a new one, like that beautiful flower she'd seen recently. After some thought, she exclaimed that her name was Kim Nari. MC, confused, asked, is her name Forsythia? After a while, the girl finished plowing the garden and managed to prepare a suitable area. He, looking at the joyful mandrakes, noted that they looked happy. He should have plowed the field earlier. Nari, looking at this, silently began to cry. The protagonist, confused, asked why she was suddenly crying. The girl replied that these mandrakes reminded her of her friends. He thought that such creatures could not possibly exist within the laboratory walls. Suddenly, a dark aura of monsters appeared around them, and sounds began to be heard. Nari, terrified, fell to the ground and began to cry. MC told her not to be afraid. It's just monsters hunting each other. She said that before she came here, she saw a monster that looked like a chicken. She thought several monsters were attacking it. He replied that it looked like that. The girl noticed that she thought he was in pain. There were bites on him. The protagonist said that he would soon be eaten. After all, they were in the demon realm. Perhaps she wanted to help that monster? Nari clutched her head and replied that she couldn't save monsters. He wondered if she was still experiencing side effects from the brainwashing. She couldn't act of her own free will. Maybe he should help her, but he didn't want it to sound like an order. The MC remarked that if she helped, he might survive. Did she want to go see it? Nari flew to the scene of the battle with lightning speed and said that she would be back soon. Sometime later, she arrived at the place where insect monsters had surrounded the chick. The girl began to furiously destroy the opponents and scream at them not to torture him. She would save him. Moments from the past began to flash before the robot's eyes. The other hunters mocked her, beat her up in a crowd, and said, if only she weren't here, everyone would live better. She only asked in response, why is it like this? After all, she was only doing what she was told. Nari began furiously smashing all the monsters and shouted that it was bad for a crowd to attack one. After a while, she returned with a chick in her arms and exclaimed in horror, what should she do? He's not coming to his senses. The protagonist, perplexed, replied, let her try to calm down first. He looked at the chick and, remembering the monster he had skinned, asked if he had encountered it before. The protagonist told her to let him look at it. He took the chick and mused that, fortunately, there were no fatal wounds. Each monster's energy contains a story. He's gotten smaller and brighter in color, but he's still the same immortal type monster as before. But why has he gotten so small? Does he heal differently than he used to? Nari worriedly asked what's wrong with him. Was he dying? MC replied no, he was just hungry. He was probably too small to find food on his own. He gave him some mana, so if they left him, he'd heal on his own. The robot girl remembered her past again and said that if they left him, he'd die. All his limbs reminded her of rice cakes, so could she adopt him? She wanted to take care of him. She would train him and feed him. The protagonist smiled and remarked that he'd grow big. Nari exclaimed that she'd feed him little by little. He agreed and added that she could do whatever she wanted. Maybe he'd even protect the courtyard? At that moment, the chick woke up and, seeing him, angrily said that this was the one who skinned him. Nari joyfully exclaimed that he was awake. The chick, confused, asked, is this a little girl in the demon realm? What's going on? MC, watching this, wondered, what's going on? Wait, does he really understand what he's saying? After some time, the girl bandaged the chick's entire body and shouted that the recovery was complete. She'd come up with a name for him. Since he sounds like a penguin, How about calling him Goo? The protagonist replied that it wasn't a bad name. The chick angrily asked why she was choosing a name for him. He already had one. Nari, not understanding what he was talking about, doused him with water and noticed that he continued to make strange sounds. Maybe he was thirsty again? After the water, he puffed up like a pufferfish. What should she do? The chick, lying on the table, asked if she could stop pouring water into him. MC thought Nari didn't understand him. He said she could stop giving him water for now. The girl shouted that he was probably hungry. She'd go and find him some food. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued building the area. He took some logs and began sawing them to make shelves. Suddenly, after sawing, the logs simply broke. Confused, MC asked what went wrong. He was doing the same thing he did when making the table and chairs. Q, observing this, noticed that the wood was a different color. The wood opposite him was coniferous. He asked if the strength of wood depends on the type. The chick agreed and wondered if he didn't know. The protagonist then asked what color signifies the strongest wood. Q replied that it was obviously red. Wait, does he really understand him? That can't be right, but just in case, let him give him a quick peek inside his mind. The chick tried to use the mind-reading skill, but the protagonist blocked it, noting with his terrifying aura that he'd searched everywhere, but still couldn't find the redwood tree. Perhaps it grew in another area? Q nervously exclaimed. He just blocked his mind-reading attempt? That was simply impossible. He could actually understand him? He replied that it would be more accurate to say that he could hear his thoughts, translated into human language. But wait, isn't it even stranger that the monster could understand human speech? MC mused that he was probably one of those rare intelligent monsters. He'd only heard of them, but never met them until now. He asked that they'd met before, hadn't he? Q agreed, adding that, frankly, he'd wanted to meet again. The protagonist asked why he wanted to meet him. The chick replied that whatever the reason, he'd saved his life. He promised himself that if he met him again, he would repay him. MC thought that he had removed the poison along with his skin, and his core remained intact. That was why he survived. He said that was great. Then would he help him? Q asked right now. He tore the bandages and, agreeing, indicated that he should follow him. He would take him to where the red trees grew. At that time, Nari was attacked by the hunter Nam Gisyok, who wore a wig. She ran away in horror from his attack and screamed that she did not want to go back to the lab. He created a powerful explosion right in front of her, causing the girl to fall. She hysterically thought that they were from the lab and had come for her. What should she do? She hates fire. It scares her. Gisyok, holding a radar in his hands, said that it was a mechanized creature. It really did change its shape freely. He was not particularly eager to attack something that looked like a child, but she needed to understand. For him, it was also a matter of life and death. The guy prepared a powerful attack and exclaimed that this was the end for her. At the last moment, the protagonist appeared before her, instantly blocking the attack and saying that he just wanted to finish the shelf and eat. Hugh remarked that he would take him to the trees later, but first let him save the girl. The protagonist mused that Nari was afraid of fire. She didn't look okay. He remarked that they should put out the fire first. The chick agreed and asked what kind of bastard would hurt a child. Jisyuk remarked that he was acting like a caveman. Where was he from? It seemed he had come for the mechanized creature too, but he didn't have much time, so let him go while he could. MC remarked that he was talking too much. The hunter furiously began attacking him with fire and shouted that he was a stubborn idiot. Let him not destroy what's almost finished and just get out of here. With just one finger, the protagonist created an incredibly powerful explosion in the rock directly above him, crushing the guy under the rocks. Sometime later, having put out the fire, he approached the girl and asked how she was feeling. Nari replied that she was fine. He saved her from the fire. MC pointed out that when she was scared, she should simply suppress that fear, and when it woke up again, she should turn it off again. He approached the hunter and grabbed his hair, only to discover it was just a wig, and the guy himself was bald. The protagonist, completely confused, asked, "What is this? Was this guy bald all along?" Nari, seeing his bald head, burst into laughter and said she wasn't scared anymore. He noted that this guy wasn't supposed to be her equal. Q said that would clarify things. Mental resonance allows one to peer into someone else's memories and transmit them to others. The chick peered into Nari's memory and showed the protagonist how the lab scientist had mocked her, asking why she was now avoiding him. It seemed she had finally developed a sense of self. She had nothing to fear. This was just another test of her endurance. In the present, MC stroked her head and praised her, then mused that the trauma wouldn't simply disappear, but perhaps this was the first step toward overcoming it. He wondered what they would do with that bald guy. The girl exclaimed that she had a good idea. After some time, they hung Jisyok right over a waterfall. Nari joyfully shouted that the water would keep his fire from burning. The bald guy wasn't scary anymore. The boy himself began to wonder if this wasn't why he came to the demon world. The girl pointed at him and exclaimed that he was bad. The MC replied that she shouldn't judge people by their appearance. He mused that it seemed like she'd recover faster than he thought. After this, the protagonist approached the pond with a pot. Hugh asked what he was doing. He explained that he was collecting water for ramen. Nari, hearing this, exclaimed that his fish ramen was the best. The protagonist asked with a smile, "So, the coconut tribe also eats fish ramen?" She agreed and added that they, the coconut tribe, love ramen. Meanwhile, Jiseok, watching them, began to wonder if this guy was at least a Class A hunter. Perhaps he was simply hiding his true abilities, or maybe he was an exclusive hunter, working alone. But hanging someone and then eating ramen, even for the demon world, that's a bit much. After this, this, Nari pulled a piranha out of the pond with her bare hands and shouted that she caught a fish. The MC replied that he only needed one fish. Let her release the rest. Jiseok, watching this, wondered in horror. What are these things? Are these monsters going to make us stinking broth? And why does he need so much water? Do they even know how to make ramen? Unable to bear this sight, the guy shouted, "Can they let him go? He'll make the ramen himself." After a while, they released him. Jiseok, holding a pack of ramen, thought, for some, this is just ramen, but now for him, it's a matter of life and death. Ramen must be made with love and adhere to the basics. He doesn't know a special recipe anyway. The amount of water must be estimated by eye. Next, add the noodles and broth base to the boiling water. Cook for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. His heart beats at 60 beats per minute, which means he needs exactly 270 beats, the perfect amount of time. After counting to 200, Jiseok pulled out the noodles and shouted, "This is an air shower." He thought he had a trick. To achieve the best texture, he needed to infuse the noodles with air. He wished he had kimchi, but this was the demon world. He'd done all he could here. He had no regrets. Afterwards, the guy made some really good ramen and motioned for them to try it. The three of them sat down to eat, and after tasting the food, they began to admire its incredible taste. Q, in complete shock, asked, "Do people eat this all the time?" Nari shouted that it was delicious. The protagonist said that even he was impressed. Afterwards, they ate their fill of ramen. Jiseok approached them and asked if they liked it. The protagonist said to name the price. It was too delicious to eat for free, so let him ask for something. If he can, he will grant his wish. Jiseok fell to his knees and, bowing his head, exclaimed, "Let him train him. He wants to be as strong as the hunter Dowoon." The MC, perplexed, asked why he called him that, and what did he want him to teach him. Jiseok replied that he was the strongest hunter he had ever met, and judging by that house, he's here for a long time. He can cook other dishes too. He knows how. His dad has his own fried chicken shop. He can make excellent fried chicken. Constantly going through the gate for supplies must be hard, right? And his clothes aren't the best. Let him be his courier. He's willing to do anything just to take lessons from him. He wants him to make him an A-class hunter. The protagonist said he had one question. Why did he attack Nari? Was it for profit? Jiseok asked, was he talking about that robot? He whispered that she is from the coconut tribe. Let him just play along. The hunter tearfully said it was personal. It's hard to explain, but he doesn't need rewards or Nari. He just wants to pass the hunter test, and the rest is unimportant. The protagonist told him to get up then. After a good meal, he needs to stretch. He invites him to spar. The last time, the fight ended quickly. Jiseok happily began to thank him. Suddenly, Nari called out to him and asked if she could fight too. He himself had told her to push away her fear. She wanted to try to put out the fire herself. Jiseok said with a smile that maybe she had forgotten. Dowoon is strong, but he is not weak either. MC pointed at the obsidian and asked if he could break that thing. He nervously exclaimed, "It's obsidian. This material is many times stronger than diamond. This is insane. You have to be at least an A-class hunter to break such ore." Suddenly, Nari delivered an incredibly powerful blow and, breaking the obsidian, said, "Let the baldy come out, she wants to fight him." Naturally awakened Jiseok, once a promising hunter. His powers first awakened at the age of 8. Considering that powers typically manifest in late adolescence, his case was exceptional. Talented and diligent, he grew at lightning speed. And before he was 12, he had become a B-rank hunter. His incredible rise brought him fame. He dreamed of becoming the greatest hunter and felt he was on the right path. All would have been well, if not for one flaw. It happened too early. At an age when most people are just beginning to develop powers, he began to rapidly go bald. His crown thinned in his early 20s, and by 25, his hairline had begun to take on the shape of an M. He tried numerous clinics and treatments, but all was in vain. With his striking appearance and incredible talent, he had once outshone everyone, but he quickly lost all his luster. His development as a hunter also stalled. One day, Jiseok was lying on the couch, watching TV. The news anchor announced that Dr. Han Myung-do from the Hanbit Institute had joined them today. He mentioned that an interesting incident had occurred during his research. Liquid metal is an extremely rare substance, even in the demon world, but someone had accidentally spilled it on the doctor's head. Myung-do himself took off his hat and, revealing his luxurious hair, said that his hair had grown back just like that, and he's almost 90 years old. The anchor asked, "So next, will he invent a cure for baldness?" The doctor replied no, as this had once again reminded him of how incredibly mysterious the demon world was. As an awakened being, he planned to serve humanity, and from the remaining liquid metal, he would create more mechanical creatures to compete for a Korean award. Jiseok furiously shouted, "Let him make that damn cure for baldness. That would really help humanity." A few days later, he saw news online that the Hanbit Institute's masterpiece, a mechanical creature, had ended up in the demon world. Jiseok began to wonder if there were any laws in the demon world. In other words, it's first come, first served, and he'll find that robot. He'll find it and pour it all over his head. By now, Nari had easily defeated him and knocked him to the ground. The protagonist remarked that he couldn't land a single clean blow. If he kept this up, he wouldn't get the job. Jiseok shouted, "He'll do even better." He begged, let him." Afterwards, the protagonist made a chest of drawers and remarked that it looked sturdy. It was probably made of mahogany. Q said he could use it for a long time. He looked at the hunter and thought, this guy has some guts, right? He's been getting beat up all day, so why does he look so energetic? Maybe it's because he took off his wig? Jiseok charged up with powerful fire magic and said he was challenging her to a rematch. match. Q, watching this, remarked that he was pretty good with fire, but what if he couldn't even defeat a child? The MC replied that she was no ordinary child. Jiseok furiously charged forward and exclaimed that victory would definitely be his this time. He delivered a powerful fire strike, but Nari transformed into liquid form, then back into human form and kicked him. After knocking out her opponent, the girl joyfully exclaimed that she was no longer afraid of fire, all thanks to him. Jiseok wondered if this was the limit of his lifelong B-rank status. He had run out of techniques. No, he would return to the ranks. Where else would a loser like him get the chance to spar like this? He wouldn't give up. He'd try again. The hunter stood up once again and asked for a rematch. Suddenly, his nose started bleeding. MC asked how long he'd been in the demon world. Jiseok replied that it was day 9. He remarked that he should return. At his level, staying here any longer was dangerous. The demonic energy could kill him. Still, he thought he had the potential to rise to A rank. Let him give it his all. Jiseok explained that he had failed the A rank promotion test for 6 years in a row. They say that if a hunter fails the same test for more than 3 years, there's no point in trying any further. MC remarked that, in his opinion, he still has room to improve. His mana hasn't fully developed yet. He shouldn't give up. When he returns, let him thoroughly cleanse himself of demonic energy. Jiseok exclaimed with incredible joy that he would try his best. He asks him to look after him. The protagonist thought that he would make him an A-rank worker. After some time, Jiseok approached the portal and asked if they needed anything. It seemed they were out of ramen. He replied that that would be nice. Nari bid him farewell and told him to be more careful. The hunter replied that she should train hard. Next time he was going to win. Oh right, did he happen to see his wig? MC, confused, replied that he hadn't. The boy said goodbye and teleported through the gate. Q asked if he thought everything would be okay. If he betrayed them, they would be in danger. He could bring other hunters, right? The protagonist asked, what did he think? He could read people's memories, right? The chick replied that he was determined to become stronger, and his bald head was real. He noted that at least he was sincere, and he liked that. He thought he was worth the investment. Nari asked in surprise if he really understood bird language. MC agreed, and added that he even built this chest of drawers on the bird's advice. It turned out pretty good, right? The house looks tidier. The girl asked if it was too dark in here. He instantly cut out windows to his height and asked if she wanted windows in the house. Nari cut a window for herself and exclaimed that light was cool. MC remarked that if she liked light, they should make something like a lamp so it wouldn't be dark at night. She asked how they could do that. He explained there was something called glowstones. They glow in the dark. If they attached a few to the ceiling, it would become bright. Q, surprised, asked if he knew where to find glowstones. The protagonist agreed and noted that this material is found in volcanic zones. The chick nervously warned that volcanic zones are some of the most dangerous places for hunters. Besides, that's where he comes from. The protagonist wondered if he didn't want to return to his homeland. Why did he look so gloomy? Nari grabbed him and asked what the chick was saying. He sounded strange. She thought he was upset. The girl started hugging him, and Q exclaimed in displeasure that this child was too perceptive. The protagonist said he thought he was worried about having to go to a volcanic zone. He would go alone, and they could stay here. Nari replied that she was coming too. She's no longer afraid of fire. She'll go to the volcanic zone with him. MC thought with a smile. He didn't think she'd overcome her fear so quickly. He asked what about the chick. Q replied that he would go too. He had some unfinished business. The protagonist smiled and indicated that they should follow him then. But first, he would prepare some equipment. Meanwhile, in the Valley of the Mandrakes, the plants were happily playing with Jiseok's wig. At that moment, a huge and dangerous monster lived in the volcanic zone. After that, they set off. Q explained that the volcanic zone is one of 3 zones that hunters in the demon world try to avoid. Volcanic ash cuts into the skin. Concentrated toxic gases and demonic energy make it impossible to breathe. In the human world, almost nothing is known about this place. He turned his gaze to Nari, who was happily splashing around in the lava, and asked what this child was doing. MC replied that she was playing with fire. Q pointed out that the child was a mechanical creature, so he thought it was normal for her. But what about him? Who was he anyway? He replied that he was a chimera hunter. The chick said that it seemed like it. But don't chimera hunters usually look like humans? The protagonist explained that he had also been a chimera, but after being reborn, he looked human again. Was he generally okay with them? He was a monster. So was he comfortable with a hunter? Q replied that it wasn't that bad. It was nice to have someone to talk to, and they didn't look like bad guys. At that moment, Nari approached them and asked if he was talking to the chick again. She wanted to talk to him too. MC said that she'd been wondering who he was before. She happily exclaimed that he was an inhabitant of the demon world, just like her. Q noted that he was too. After wandering around the volcanic zone for a while, the chick said that the glowstones should be near the eruption sites. The protagonist replied that they needed to get to the crater, which was already close. After that, they climbed to the top of the boiling volcano. He looked at the crater walls and noticed that there was a glowstone, but there was some kind of monster there. Was that a fire toad? And another one, though this one was crying. Nari called out to him, pointed, and exclaimed that there was another one. Q noted that it looked like the female had died. The one with the eggs on her back was the female. They carry their eggs on their backs. Only females have this sunken back during breeding season. But since the female had died, all these eggs would die too. The temperature of the crater was too high for the eggs to survive. Nari teared up up and said that the toad looked sad about the death of a friend. The protagonist made a quick dash and motioned for her to wait here for a second. He jumped straight into the crater and found himself face to face with the toad. Q nervously exclaimed that the fire toad was very sensitive right now. He shouldn't come any closer. In an instant, the monster began attacking him with a column of flame. The protagonist simply approached it with lightning speed, poked its forehead with his finger, and instantly put the toad to sleep. He wondered if it was the Neca cobra's paralyzing toxin. He added just a little bit, so the toad would wake up quickly. Fire toads are immune to toxins. Nari called out to him worriedly, asking if he was okay. MC agreed and said that he had fire toad cells in him. They couldn't do anything about the dead one, but the others would survive. He tied the eggs to the body of a living frog, and said that he tied it tightly, so the babies would be fine until they hatched. The fire toad, realizing what was happening, said goodbye to the dead female and leaped incredibly high. Reaching Nari, he looked at her and continued jumping. The girl shouted that the fire toad had looked this way. It seemed he was thanking them. MC thought he must have been looking at the dead female. He motioned for them to get down. They needed to get the glowstones and go home already. Nari joyfully exclaimed that they needed to quickly dig up the stones and go home. After that, they began digging for the material itself. The protagonist told her to be careful, not to drop it on her feet, or it would hurt. Q helped collect a few stones and lay down next to the backpack. He noticed this and asked if he was okay. The chick replied that he used to easily play with the stones. If only he hadn't cowered. MC pointed out that he wasn't obligated to help them. Why wasn't he going about his business? He brought gifts because he wants to meet his friends, right? Q exclaimed sheepishly. What kind of friends could a monster have? He had no intention of seeing them at all. He'd just leave these gifts behind. The protagonist said he missed his own kind. Are intelligent monsters different from others? The chick, even more sheepishly, cried out that he didn't miss them. He just regretted not being able to say goodbye to them when he left. MC inquired, but had he abandoned his pack? Q replied that becoming smarter was great, but there were bad moments too. He remembered feeling different from everyone else in the pack and said that in the lands of the one-eyed monkeys, a monkey with 2 eyes was considered very strange. That's why he left. His fellow monkeys probably didn't even notice his absence. They never had much of a sense of camaraderie. The chick started to pull out the glowstone, but he overdid it, causing the stone to fall to the ground. After the fall, there was a cracking sound. Nari exclaimed that she heard a sound. There's an egg lying here on the ground. MC remarked that it looks like a monster egg. But what kind is it? Wait, is it cracked? The girl said the crack was small. Maybe the chick injured it with the glowstone when it dropped it? The protagonist said he thought the baby inside pierced the shell itself, an indicator of health and strength. Nari wondered what they should do with it. She suggested taking the egg with them. If they left it here, it would fry. Q exclaimed excitedly. What if something hatched? MC remembered the dresser and wondered if there was one place they could use as a nest. He also wondered who was inside. He said there was no choice, they would take it. Q nervously exclaimed. He had never seen an egg like that. The protagonist wondered who asked him to drop the glowstone. The chick asked what if Nari was in danger. He replied with a smile that everything would be fine. He would take care of it. Q calmed down a bit and agreed. MC said that now they needed to get more light stones. After some time, they returned home, where Jiseok was already waiting. He saw them and asked where they had been. He could carry their loot. The protagonist was slightly surprised, handed over the backpack, and noted how heavy it was. The guy exclaimed that he was strong. Taking the backpack, he couldn't lift it, and asked in surprise what they had there that was so heavy. The protagonist noticed something strange, called out to him, and told him to look at it. What happened to his face? At that moment, Q's relatives discovered his gift, ramen, and ate it with pleasure. He never thought he was the type to get beaten. He scratched his head with an awkward smile and told him that Nari beat him all the time. Dawoon thought, is this what he's proud of? Jiseok quickly ran off under the pretext of serving him food, and he looked after him doubtfully. After that, he got down to business, cutting stones. Nari came up to him and asked what he was doing now, and he told her that he wanted to make a lamp. He cuts and shapes light stones, and then he'll hang them on the ceiling. It will be quite cute, don't you think so? She let out a surprised sigh and then exclaimed with delight that she thought he was very smart. He knows so much and explains things very well, and he also has a kind heart, just like her dad. He smiled and asked how her dad was doing. He's in the coconut tribe now, right? She immediately told him that he was doing fine. Meanwhile, Q was lying down, relaxing, and enjoying the sunset. He said the sunset was so warm, not like in a volcanic zone, it felt like his body was melting. Then a huge shadow loomed over him. 3 mandrakes decided to disturb his rest. They looked so threatening, as if Q was about to be brutally punished, and suddenly the smallest of them jumped straight at him and spun like a shuriken, but he bounced off his stomach like a trampoline. Q immediately jumped up, not understanding what was going on, and the mandrakes started attacking him. Nari exclaimed, why are they fighting? MC said they were probably unhappy that their territory was being invaded. Finally, Jiseok arrived with plates in his hands and said that the fried bean curd rice balls were sweet, sour, and so tempting that they draw children into their nets. The taste was simply superb. The guy was very proud of his dish. It was easy to make, but it was a truly wonderful dish. Q remarked that it looked delicious, and Jiseok told them to hurry up and eat. But Dowoon was still bothered by something. He never answered him about what was wrong with his face. The guy scratched his head in confusion and had to tell him everything. He went to the Hunters Association to take the exam to promote to A-class and ran into some A-class jerks. MC noticed that they were bullying him because he failed the test 7 times, and he got into a fight, and this is the result. He confirmed it. They told him to stop hanging around there. They kept pressuring him, teasing him about his bald head and stuff like that. Dowoon asked, but he just shaved his hair, right? He's not completely bald. Jiseok looked at him with a look that made him understand everything without words, because the real reason for his hair loss was a medical mystery. He felt awkward and asked when the exam was. He was told it was in 2 months, 60 days, and then the MC stood up, saying that it was time for special training. Jiseok immediately jumped up and excitedly asked, "Is this true?" He should just tell him what to do, and he would do it. Dowoon said that, first of all, from now on, he was washing Kim Nari's dishes, then pointed to the bag of light stones and said that he needed to clean them. They were covered in volcanic dust. Jiseok awkwardly pointed out that he had said it was special training, to which he replied that if he didn't want to do it, he could remain a B-class member for life. After that, he called out to Nari and said that they were going fishing, which made her very happy, and Jiseok called out to him in confusion, but he ignored him. He sadly lowered his head, with no choice but to start cleaning the dishes, and he decided to console himself with the thought that he probably had a reason for this. After that, he threw his backpack over his shoulder and, gathering his strength, growled and thought that everyone thinks that he is born a genius. But he, Nam Jiseok, is a man who achieved his B-class through hard work. A man who has only diligence and perseverance, determined to go to the very end. A man who gets up from his knees and tries for the 7th time. Carrying this huge burden on his back, he followed Dowoon and said that he would go with him, and thought that he is a man who has it all. In addition, he is very kind, very cool, and looks powerful. The fishing started. Nari was already starting to fall asleep because the fish weren't biting, and then she turned her gaze to Jiseok and said that all the fish were swimming towards him. Menacing fish even started jumping out of the water, trying to bite him, and he panicked and called Dowoon for help because they stunk. Water monsters are the worst. After that, he let out a frightened cry, and MC thought that this guy needs to be watched constantly. He threw the fishing rod and approached him, asking, "What is he doing with mana? Let him just use the shield." He scratched the back of his head with an awkward smile and told him that he had practiced, but he wasn't very good at it. MC decided to try something. He gave him a stone and told him to just hold it, after which dark energy reached out to it and he immediately let go of the stone, exclaiming in fear, "Isn't this demonic energy?" His hand, he can't put any power into it at all. Dowoon said that some glowstones contain demonic energy, real energy, from the demon realm, so he must use raw mana to release his true power. He has plenty of mana in his body, he just lacks the ability to control it. Jiseok imagined mana flowing through his body and looked at his palms, and he said that he must open a path within himself. Let him follow this path and guide his mana. Jiseok concentrated and gathered mana in his hands, and MC told him to focus on his mana and try to lift the glowstone again. He touched it and tried to lift it, but it was difficult. Demonic energy gushed right into his face, but he overcame it and lifted the stone with a triumphant cry. He laughed and exclaimed, "So washing the dishes and glowstones was part of his plan? Was this also he could learn to control mana?" The MC smiled contentedly and told him to keep using mana. From now on, the dishes were his concern. Jiseok didn't even object. On the contrary, he was only happy and said he could rely on him. He, Nam Jiseok, was a man who could polish everything to a shine and was the most thrifty man in the world. Night had fallen. Dowoon had already prepared the lamps and hung them on the ceiling, and they all went to bed. Jiseok, as always, snored loudly and drooled. The MC, in contrast, slept quietly, but Q was very disturbed by this, because he was still trying to fall asleep. He thought he should have slept during the day, and then he heard a sound, and opened his eyes. Nari got up and headed for the exit, and he wondered where she was going so late at night. In fact, she went to the river because she was upset that her clothes were dirty. She decided to wash them, and it turns out she was being followed. Dowoon, peeking out from behind a tree, asked why she decided to do laundry in the middle of the night. Q called him an idiot and said that she was a girl and didn't have any clothes to change into. Watching her, MC thought that he always didn't care what she wore, but she was just a child. Was he behaving inappropriately? She meanwhile finished doing the laundry and walked out of the water proudly, after which Dowoon came out of his hiding place, pretending that he had gone for a walk and accidentally bumped into her, and she nervously asked what he was doing there. He told her that he was taking a walk with Q. Did she decide to go for a walk too? She excitedly confirmed this, and he asked her to stand still, then tightened the belt around her waist and tucked a flower under it. He asked what she thought of this outfit. In his opinion, it even looked cute. Nari was very happy. She enthusiastically said that it was very beautiful, just like his. He told her that these were forsythia flowers, her favorite. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound from the bushes, and she immediately grabbed his hand in fear and asked what that sound was. He smiled and told her that everything was fine, it was just a grasshopper. In fact, it was a steel locust, a B-class monster, but he decided to keep quiet about it so as not to scare her. After that, they went home and he asked if she needed anything, for example, clothes or shoes. She told him that he had already given her everything she needed, and she really liked it all. But despite her words, the next morning, he went to District 13, not far from the slums. He emerged from the portal and thought that even though she said everything was fine, forcing her to wear the same clothes, which, moreover, did not fit her, was wrong, and Q would not stop scolding him for it. All the hunters immediately noticed him because he was barefoot, but he didn't care at all. He thought he should take her here so she could choose what she liked herself. But given her injury, the human world might not be safe for her. Besides, she still had a tracking device on her body. It's funny. Who would have thought that he would use the stone gate to go back to the slums for clothes for the child? He looked around, quietly saying that he was sure there was a clothing store somewhere around here. How much time had passed? The store hadn't closed, had it? Someone tugged at his sleeve and asked if he was looking for a clothing store. For 10,000, he would take him there. He wasn't a local, was he? He knew a good and inexpensive place. The MC said he would pay him when he got change, but he didn't have any small bills right now. The guy sighed heavily, noticing his bare feet and thinking that he was definitely a newbie who got robbed the moment he entered the demon world. He put his hands behind his head and sauntered ahead of him, asking, "Do you have money for clothes?" Let him follow him. He usually takes money in advance, but he looked so pathetic that he would make an exception for him. Dowoon thanked him with a smile, and he said his name was Bongsu. The MC introduced himself in return and seeing the patrol cars, remarked that the slums had become safer. Bongsu asked, "Didn't he just awaken?" He was surprised and asked, "Is it that obvious?" He said that he just came out of the gate without any equipment. He must have spent a fortune on equipment, which was eventually stolen by thugs. He shouldn't be upset since everyone starts somewhere. He smiled and said that he was smart for his age. Bongsu immediately became indignant and exclaimed that he was not a child. He was just short because he didn't eat much. He was actually 17. Dowoon noticed a group of guys robbing a poor guy of money, and Bongsu said that although there were slums everywhere here, he should avoid the 13th district. It was very dangerous there. The gang, previously operating in the 11th district, expanded its territory all the way here. The police had almost given up. That's why people don't go this way. By the way, they were in the 12th district now. MC frowned and wondered if the orphanage where he grew up was still in the 13th district. Meanwhile, a woman was sitting in a clothing store, bored. She sighed heavily and said that she was apparently not herself when she opened a clothing store in the slums. Young people don't have children because they can't support them, and almost all of her clothes are children's. Maybe she should open another business? The bell rang. Bongsu entered the store and, calling her Auntie Boss Park, said that he was back. She immediately became furious and exclaimed, "How many times does she have to tell him not to call her auntie? She's not even married, so let him stop." Meanwhile, Dowoon was looking around, since it was his first time in a clothing store, and Bongsu told her that this guy said he needed clothes, and he was also a hunter. The woman irritably asked him to come to her, which made him nervous, and then she grabbed him and exclaimed, "Is he going to keep bringing broke hunters to her? Does he even know how many unpaid bills she has?" He exclaimed that it was still unclear whether he had money or not, and she told him to look at him. "Does he look like a man who has money?" He responded that he was actually cute. She herself had asked him to bring weak hunters here who resembled her little brother. She exclaimed that it had only happened once. If she continued to help kids like him, she would eventually become homeless. He exclaimed, "Was that what he asked for?" She herself brought him food. She said that none of this mattered, that he should take a better look at himself. She would give him money so that he should go and tidy himself up. MC, meanwhile, examined the goods and turned to Park, saying that he would like to buy some clothes. He handed her a check for 10 million won and said that this was all he had. How many clothes could he buy with that? This piece of paper began to glow in their eyes like the greatest treasure, and they realized that they could not pass up such a customer. She clapped her hands and turned into a kind salesperson, and said that this was a place where he could meet anew himself every day. "Welcome to the happy boon world." Bongsu brought a tray with food and drinks and sat Dowoon at the table. While he was giving him a massage, Park said that they have clothes for both adults and children. Is he looking for something for himself? He told her that he was looking for clothes for a preschool girl. Well, and since he was here, he might as well get something for himself. He also needed shoes. Park smiled widely and said that this was so sweet, he had come to the right place. They specialize in children's clothing. They could start with the spring-summer collection. She showed him a couple of outfits and said that lace was a must. And for active children, sportswear would be good, because it's easier to move in, right? If he sees pink, let him take that outfit right away. She did her job very well, and the MC bought everything she offered him. Watching the long receipt being printed, she shed a tear of happiness and prayed that every day would be like this. She has nothing else to sell. She can't even believe it. She said there are more than 100 things here. Maybe he wants to arrange delivery? He told her that he would carry everything himself, then handed several bags with clothes and bills to Bongsu, saying that they were for him, and he also had something to ask of him. After that, Do-woon gathered all the clothes in a huge bag and went somewhere with Bongsu. He took him to a clean and decent hotel and said that there was a police station nearby, so it was safe, and the owner was a very nice person. MC asked him to wait there and went inside, and Bongsu began to suspect something was wrong. It doesn't matter how much money he has. Give him, a teenager, 100,000 won and buy clothes? He heard that nowadays children are lured with money and then kidnapped. Should he run? But what if this guy is actually kind, just like Boss Park? Do-woon left the hotel and remarked that, as he said, the owner was quite nice and it was clean inside. He handed him the keys to the room and said that it looked like he had been sleeping on the streets. He had paid rent for a year, so he would be living here from now on. Meals were also included, so let him eat well. Bongsu looked at the keys in confusion, and when he was about to leave, he plucked up his courage and asked if he went in there, would he kidnap him? He didn't understand what he was talking about. He was the one who brought him here. He asked if this wasn't what he wanted, then what? They had just met. Tips, clothes, even a room. Why was he being so kind to him? The MC answered him with a smile that it was just that he reminded him of the past. It had been a long time since he had lived like him. After that, he said goodbye to him, saying that they would see each other again. Finally, he returned home. A naked Jiseok, whose clothes he had mercilessly stolen, ran up to him, wrapped in a blanket, and Nari began to scold him for leaving without saying anything. He said that he had gone to buy her gifts, and her anger immediately turned to delight. He showed them the bag, and Q asked in surprise how many clothes he had bought. Nari took out a sweater from there and began to rejoice, and Jiseok asked if there was anything for him. He answered that he himself knew the answer. After which, he told the girl that if she liked something, she should come into the house and try it on. She ran into the house, while the egg began to shake. It seemed like someone was about to hatch. After that, Do-woon began folding clothes. This activity even relaxed him. Nari ran up to him and showed him her outfit, saying that she thought it looked cute. He agreed with her and asked if she liked this dress the most. She said hesitantly that she would try on more clothes, after which she came out to him in a half-put-on jumpsuit and asked how to wear these pants. Then she appeared to him as a ghost, or rather in his t-shirt, and when she went into the house once again to change, the MC noticed that she was absolutely delighted. Q called her cute, and then she came out to them again and said that she had chosen an outfit for herself. She proudly showed him a sweater with a bird pattern and said that it looked just like their Q. She really liked it. Q awkwardly asked if he looked like that. Do-woon complimented her choice and offered to fold the clothes herself, to which she happily agreed. And Q looked at the huge bag that was still half full and asked what he was going to do with all these clothes. There was no room in the room. He answered that he was just thinking about it. He would build a house and make a dressing room, install built-in closets there. Q pointed out that they should cut down more trees then, and he told him not to worry. They already had workers. He turned his gaze towards the forest and asked Jiseok, did he want special training? Right after that, something crashed in front of the forest. That was Jiseok landing. He confidently said that he was ready for special training at any time, then walked up to him and handed him the skin, saying that he had already prepared his training equipment. He didn't understand what he was talking about, and asked, aren't these leather clothes his training uniform? The skin was soaked in poison. He thought he was going to die when he recklessly grabbed it. It must be some kind of special method of pushing himself to the limit, even in everyday life, and becoming stronger. He truly respects him, and following in his footsteps, he will train even harder. In fact, he was just too lazy to wash it. He told him to put it on then, and his excitement immediately disappeared, replaced by bewilderment. MC thought that these clothes were really great for training, and he said that he had decided on the training for today. Let him put it on and go chop down trees. Q said he'd go too, and Jiseok nervously said he might die if he wore it. And why the trees? Suddenly, Nari called out loudly for Do-woon. She looked out the window and exclaimed that something strange was happening with the egg. After that, the four gathered around the egg and began to wait. MC noticed that it was moving more and more actively. It looked like something was about to hatch soon. Jiseok asked suspiciously, it's not a disaster-level monster, is it? Nari excitedly exclaimed that she was sure it would be a cute little monster, and he asked, how could she know that? She indignantly said that she knew for sure, and finally the egg cracked. Seeing someone's eye, Jiseok immediately hid behind the girl, but she, on the contrary, was in anticipation. This little monster pushed the shell out with its paws, crawled out of the egg, and Jiseok exclaimed in panic that it had sharp claws and scales, and even a long tongue. But the monster wasn't that scary, it was just a cute snake, albeit with chicken legs. Jiseok asked in surprise what kind of snake it was, and Nari exclaimed that this monster was so cute. Suddenly, this snake jumped high and landed right on the face of the already terrified Jiseok. He stared at it in shock, trying to comprehend what had happened, and then screamed loudly in fear. After that, he finally put on the skin and went to work, and all this time Q hit him on the forehead with a stick and urged him on. Jiseok, gritting his teeth, continued to carry logs and wondered if this monster was scolding him or if he was imagining it. And this poison, he can barely breathe. How did Do-woon even wear that? Meanwhile, he finished with the clothes and stretched, thinking it was funny to do laundry after so long. Nari called out to him and said that the snake liked bread. It was a very cute and docile monster. MC smiled and said that he thought the snake understood that she saved it. She asked what they would name it, and he said that since it was a snake, they could name it Sasa. At that moment, the snake noticed something and jumped out of her hands and ran somewhere, and Nari gave chase. Q flew up to Do-woon and noted that the children were getting along well, and he said that she liked their new family member. Isn't this a rare species? He had never seen a monster like this. Q thoughtfully said that he hadn't seen one either. But since this creature is definitely from a volcanic zone, they need to carefully monitor the mandrakes. Most monsters in the volcanic zone consider these plants a delicacy. Since they're valuable here, they need to be careful not to get eaten. Besides, the stronger the magical energy in the plants, the tastier they are. A snake will definitely try to eat a mandrake. In other words, this snake is most likely a natural enemy of mandrakes. Meanwhile, Sasa reached the mandrake bed, and they, sensing a threat, immediately crawled out of the ground to confront. They all approached the bed, and Jiseok asked what was going on. MC noted that Q was right, and Nari volunteered to stop them. He said it would be great if they didn't fight, but this is the demon realm, and they might have to establish a hierarchy. Sasa is still young, so she's not particularly dangerous, so he suggests they just observe. Meanwhile, Sasa began pacing back and forth, waiting for the right moment, and the mandrakes drew their weapons and closely watched their enemies' every move. Sasa's gaze suddenly became menacing. It seemed to have already chosen a target. The mandrake looked frightened, and then Sasa pounced on him, and Jiseok exclaimed that it seemed to be targeting the smallest one. The eldest mandrake blocked the attack, protecting his brother. Then they formed a triangle, a special formation for defense, not attack. Then the second counterattacked, hitting the snake with a stick, but it blocked the attack with its tail and seemed to smile. But it was too early to rejoice. The third was still there. The smallest pounced on Sasa, his fists charged with enormous force, and as soon as he struck the snake, it immediately burst into tears. Jiseok began to worry about Sasa, and Nari said that the snake was definitely in shock. For the first time since birth, it felt pain. She ran to calm the baby down, and Do-woon noted that the mandrakes had won today, and Jiseok and Q said it was a grand and impressive fight. Since the show was over, the MC suggested everyone get back to business, and Q immediately gave Jiseok a kick, and he resentfully said that he had no heart. Meanwhile, Yubeom cut through the sea on his powerful wings. A pale Jiseok was still working on the wardrobe. Nari was also helping. She was coating the logs with a special substance. Do-woon, meanwhile, was putting all the clothes on the shelves. A new day dawned. Jiseok threw off the skin and fell to his knees, screaming that he was finally free. 2 days without sleep, it was pure hell. Well, now he can rest. He looked at this creepy house and thought that he did as he was told. But is this normal? The MC approached him and remarked that he'd done better than he'd expected. He thought, so everything's okay? Nari took a deep breath and said the dressing room smelled of flowers, and Jiseok was surprised at first, but then he sniffed and smiled, thinking that the lavender scent was so calming, and even better with his eyes closed. Nari asked why it smelled like flowers. Do-woon told her that Q had specifically chosen fragrant wood, and he remarked that the clothes would smell like that too. The mandrakes and Sasa also liked the scent, and Jiseok asked if the snake was named Sasa. Nari said it was her uncle who named the monster that, and he suggested they change the name if they had better options. Jiseok happily asked, how about a chicken snake? He shook his head, saying he had no imagination at all, and Nari suggested pee-pee, but he didn't like that either. Q said they were thinking so narrowly, and MC said that he also said that he had a real name. He proudly said that his real name was Horseshoe Rocky Mountains, which completely reflected his personality, and Do-woon thought that this one was also hopeless. He suggested that they just keep their old name, and they didn't object. Q asked, since the house had been expanded, what was the plan now? MC said that he had thought about it while he was in the human world. True, when he was alone, he didn't need to think about such things. But now, things are different. He asked, how about building a strong fence around the house? Then, if he goes away, no one will be able to get to them. Jiseok glanced doubtfully at the house and said that he didn't think anyone would come here at all. And he said that no one knows what will happen. S-rank monsters or hunters might come. Q said that then they would need durable magic materials. There was a stone on the coast stronger than black jade. He'd heard of yellow sparkling quartz. If they built a fence out of it and attached glowstones underneath, it would look great. Do-woon imagined what it would look like, and noted that at night the camping atmosphere would be beautiful and suggested that they hurry to the coast. Jiseok was shocked. Did they even know what kind of place that was? He didn't want to go there so much that he decided to feign illness. He fell to his knees and tiredly touched his forehead, saying that he needed to go back and restore his magical energy. When Do-woon told him to take care of the mandrakes if they returned late, He was very happy and said he understood everything. But they should be careful along the coast. It's a dangerous place where hunters below rank A don't go. More importantly, that area is controlled by 2 disaster-level monsters. He asked, what kind of monsters? Jizeok asked in response, doesn't he know about that? It looks like these are chimera hunters who escaped from the research center. They have the faces of birds, but the bodies of humans. Meanwhile, Baeom flew to the coast, where hunters were already waiting for it, and the captain of their squad ordered them to prepare a tracking sensor. The hunter prepared himself, then threw it at Baeom and hit it, causing a flash. He was happy, and then Baeom escaped, and one of the hunters said that these were disaster-level monsters. He thought it was just rumors. He turned to the captain and asked if they should pursue him. He told them to just wait until he hid in the shelter. There were only 2 of them. They attached a tracking sensor to one of them, so there was no need to rush. The guy said that 60 years had already passed. Shouldn't they be dead or have completely turned into monsters? Why do they still have human bodies? The captain answered him that it was apparently a failed experiment. No matter what anyone says, the production of chimera hunters is humanity's greatest achievement. They can't let these failed experiments tarnish this achievement. They'll get rid of them today. The hunter watching Baeom nervously called out to the commander and informed him that it wasn't flying away, but hurtling straight toward them. The captain immediately ordered them to set up a defensive barrier. But Baeom flapped its wings so hard that the wind currents pierced the barrier and even managed to injure them. They realized they'd underestimated it. It had managed to do it in one blow, but it flew away to gain speed and then flew toward them again. The captain became very agitated and called out to his subordinates, asking what they were doing. Tell them to block it. Baeom was about to strike, but suddenly Nari pounced on him and told him not to bully weaklings. He immediately realized she was a chimera, after which they both retreated and he landed. Nari complained to Do-woon that Uncle Sparrow was bullying ordinary people, and he said that in his opinion, it was quite the opposite. One of the hunters excitedly called the commander and showed him a tablet, saying that it seemed like a mechanical creature was nearby. He asked what he was talking about, and he said that the fee for the request was decent, so he brought a tracking device with him. MC patted the girl on the head and thought that she had a tracking device on her, which would be problematic. And then there was this guy. He called out to him and asked if he remembered him. They were neighbors. Let him remind him of his number. Baeom was surprised, and Do-woon said that he didn't know he was still alive. It was good to meet again. The guy began to guess who he was, while the hunters decided to leave, as this whole group was very suspicious. The captain ordered everyone to retreat. They would regroup and return, and MC looked at them and told Baeom that if they let them go, it would end badly for both of them, so he suggested that he deal with them first. Baeom remembered him. They always lay next to each other. He was number 33, and Do-woon was 17, and that smell still emanated from him, which he definitely won't forget. Only they knew this. The smell of research center chemistry. He called him by his number and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. 66 years ago, in the forest near the TDA lab, Baeom escaped with his sister and they were already being chased. Jia felt sick. He glanced at her and thought that, as luck would have it, the side effects were showing up right now. He continued running, the grass cutting his skin, and he wondered, was this really the right decision? Even if he died at the hands of those idiots from the lab, wouldn't it have been better to abandon Jia? If only she could completely turn into a bird, she wouldn't be able to do anything with those small wings. She said his wings were so warm, she was fine. Let him run. Tears immediately appeared in his eyes, and he told her to hold on a little longer. Once they got out of the forest, someone would help them. And then a bright light hit his eyes. Do-woon shone a flashlight on them, and he worriedly asked why he was here. He lowered the flashlight and told him that he overheard the lab workers. They said that his side effects were so strong that they would get rid of him soon. He came to tell him about it. Baeom said that he was a real psycho. He always helps him in terribly difficult moments. Do-woon said that even if they got out and didn't come back in 3 days, the detonation spell would kill them. It didn't look like his sister was going to be eliminated. Wouldn't it be better to stay in the lab and get a medicine that suppresses the side effects? That way, he'll have at least an extra day. He frowned and said that he didn't experience any side effects, so he doesn't know what it's like to live like them. One day in the lab, he got a really bad headache. His sister immediately hugged him and suggested that he run away. She wants to return to normal life, at least for a day. Now he put his sister down by the tree and asked if it matters how long he lives or how he lives out his time. He wants to live freely, even if it's just for 1 day, so let him stop talking this nonsense and attack. He pulled out his wings and prepared himself, and Do-woon remained silent. A few seconds later, a portal appeared behind him and he asked in shock, where did he get the gatestone? He said that if they crossed over to the demon world, one of 2 things would happen. Either the demonic energy would poison their human cells, or their demonic cells would absorb the demonic energy and activate. If he's serious, isn't this the best option for him? Even if he can't control the demonic energy and turns into a monster, he will live freely. The detonator won't activate in the demon realm. He asked doubtfully if there was a way to survive in the demon realm as a human. He answered that theoretically, he needs to accumulate enough mana to protect his human body and mind from demonic energy. In his current state, it won't be easy, but you never know, maybe it will work. The lab workers saw the portal, they heard their voices, and Baeom said that he was leaving. After all, They had been neighbors for 4 years, and they still don't know each other's names. He said his name was Baeom, and then MC told him his name back with a smile. At the moment, he sprayed some dust on the hunters and asked what his name was. The captain confusedly answered that he didn't know, and he asked why he thought he came here. He told him again that he didn't know anything, and he opened a portal and told them to go in and forget about everything that happened here. Baeom asked if he erased their memories with forgetting powder and hypnosis. He confirmed it. They transplanted forgetting grass cells into him. Their memories will be erased in about 3 hours. He asked if that's because he didn't show any side effects. They transplanted a lot of things into him. Dawoon said that a lot happened after they left and clarified, "Isn't he number 33, Baeom?" He nodded and said that it was amazing. He didn't think he remembered him. Nari tugged Dawoon by the sleeve and asked if they were both friends. He confirmed it and said that he was from the Sparrow tribe. Baeom didn't understand what he was talking about, but didn't protest, and MC asked her if the Sparrow tribe and the Coconut tribe were allies, right? She excitedly confirmed this, and Baeom, meanwhile, thought that he didn't understand a word of what they were saying. Nari bowed to him in apology. She thought he was bad, and suddenly her stomach growled loudly, and she told Dawoon that she was hungry. He asked Baeom where his home was. Did he have any food? He was completely confused. He didn't understand what kind of child this was at all. Was this his daughter or some kind of role-playing game? After that, Baeom took them to his home, in a huge cage. Nari remarked that it looked just like a real bird's nest, and Dawoon added that he had settled in well. Baeom brought them a tray of food and told them to try it, but he didn't know if they would like it. It was grilled clams seasoned with butternut from the demon realm, which tastes like butter, and also red moss. Nari was surprised by such a huge clam, and MC remarked that it looked delicious. Q decided to try it first, and as soon as a piece of clam was in his mouth, he delightedly said it was so fresh, like he just swallowed the ocean, or the ocean had swallowed him. Nari exclaimed that the flavor unfolded with each bite, and Dawoon said it was even better with red moss. Baeom proudly said that red moss was the most essential spice. He was glad they liked it. They should eat slowly. Suddenly, a flash of pain shot through his head. No one but MC noticed. Baeom quickly pretended nothing had happened, and Nari asked him for more clams. He laughed awkwardly and said he didn't have any more ingredients. And then she asked in anticipation if she caught him some clams, would he cook more? He said that of course he could, but it was dangerous for a small child to catch shellfish. She didn't hear these last words and rushed to the sea, joyfully shouting that she would catch 10 of them, and Q noted that this was exactly how many were needed to be full. Finally, the two old friends were alone. Baeom said that, who would have thought that he would come back to life thanks to immortal cells? His life was really something. Is he going to take revenge on the lab? He answered him that sometimes he thinks about it, as if he would like to take revenge on them, but now his life is not so bad, so he is still thinking. And does he want revenge? He answered him that he said that all his spells disappeared when he came back to life, and there is still a detonation spell in their bodies. They will be torn apart as soon as they set foot in the human world. Dawoon thoughtfully noted that it seems like he can now control his wings, and his head is not returning to normal. He told him that he could change his head, but he wouldn't. Jia's face changed, and if he only looked normal, she would be upset. MC said that he understood everything, and asked seriously, he does know that he has a month left at most? He chuckled and asked, so he noticed this? This all brings back memories. When he first came here, it was hard, but he desperately saved up mana to survive. Then he suddenly felt that his mana and demonic energy had come into balance, thanks to which he felt peace for the first time in a long time, when suddenly, for some reason, Jia's mana vessel cracked, and her demonic energy began to boil. He tried to force it open, and ended up damaging his own vessel. He still somehow manages to hold on, but Jia has been eating fruits with sleeping poison and has been sleeping for some time. Dawoon noticed how he was trembling, and thought that it meant she was deliberately putting herself into a coma to slow down the seething demonic energy. He looked towards the sea, and thought that when the mana vessel is damaged, you can make a mandrake decoction and restore it, but the bird head didn't know this. Meanwhile, Jia woke up, she ate some fruits, but they no longer helped, and her body continued to change. She grabbed her shoulders, and an inhuman scream burst from her mouth. MC meanwhile told her brother about the mandrake, and he jumped up from excitement and asked, did he just say that they can survive? But how? He answered him that he had been studying pharmacology in the lab since he was 15. He probably doesn't know about this. They just need to drink purified water from the mana source, infused with mandrake root, a plant-type monster, mandrake. It screams when pulled out of the ground. Although the remains of their roots seem useless at first glance, they actually absorb underground demonic energy and then reproduce. They are the source of life force, which is perhaps why purified water infused with the remains of these roots promotes the regeneration of mana vessels. He never thought he would need this knowledge. Apparently, his cultivation of mandrakes was not in vain. He told his friend that he would prepare this water for him, and the friend exclaimed in surprise, could he do it himself? He answered him that in order to purify the water, he needed to find an alchemist, and he couldn't go out into the human world because of the curse. So while he was gone, Let him look after these children. Baeom agreed, and again he was in his debt to him. Dowoon said that the alchemist would demand payment. Does he have anything? He thoughtfully answered him that he didn't have money, but he did have things. He brought him a huge backpack, and he asked where he got so many things. He scratched his head with an awkward smile, and told him that he had packed all the things of the hunters who had visited here. Would that be enough? He told him that it was more than enough, and then set off. He came to the slums and immediately met Bongsu to help him find the awakened alchemist. He led him somewhere and put his hands behind his head, saying that last year a branch of the Alchemy Association opened even in the slums. They would find something there. MC noticed the bracelets on his arms and asked why he was wearing those things. He told him that he was pumping up his stamina. He wanted to become as strong as him. Dowoon raised an eyebrow in confusion, not understanding what he was talking about, and he said that he entered the demon realm without anything on him. He must be a very strong hunter. He also wants to become that strong, so he eats a lot and trains hard. He smiled and thought that it looked like he had grown since last time. It must be a growth spurt. Soon they reached the Alchemy Association, and Bongsu said that a new manager named Kim had recently arrived. They said he was very capable and a good person. Hearing voices, he turned around and said that it was him. Kim was standing nearby, almost crying, talking to someone on the phone, and Bongsu sighed tiredly and said that it looked like loan sharks were calling him again. In this place, taking out loans is common. This man worked at the Golden City branch for 20 years, but he was recently demoted and transferred here. They say his salary was also cut. MC noted that since he was demoted, it means he did something wrong, and the guy said that was not true at all. From what he heard, there, in the Golden City, someone from the top was secretly embezzling money from the slums. CEO An is notorious for his misdeeds, and when manager Kim reported it, he was labeled problematic and sent here. After finishing the conversation, Kim, upset, headed back to the association, and Bongsu called out to him joyfully, causing a smile to immediately appear on his face. He approached him and noticed that he had grown taller. What brought him here? He told him that his friend was looking for an alchemist, so he brought him here. Dowoon took a closer look at the man. There was a noticeable aura around him, and he thought that high-ranking alchemists weren't usually found here, so he didn't expect to meet one in his immediate circle. Bongsu left for training, and Kim led Dowoon inside the building. Meanwhile, Assistant Park sat and looked bored. He sighed heavily and wondered what he was doing in this hell with such superiors. At best, D-rank hunters come in to buy low-grade potions. Good sales results are out of the question, and he definitely won't be getting a promotion in this life. Hearing the door opening, he immediately stood up and excitedly asked the manager if he was back yet. Kim asked him to pour them something, and MC said he would get straight to the point since he didn't have time. He seems to be an A+ rank alchemist. He can make purified water for the mana vessel from mandrakes, right? He needs about 2 liters. Kim adjusted his glasses and thought, mandrakes are here in the slums? This is absurd, and how did he even know his rank? He answered that he could do it, but such valuable material wasn't here. Then Dowoon took something out of his pocket and asked if this would work. The manager's eyes widened at the sight of it. There were roots in front of him, and he enthusiastically exclaimed that this was such powerful demonic energy. These were definitely mandrake roots. They were also so fresh, as if they had just been picked. He had never seen them in such good condition. MC took off his backpack and said that he would pay for the services with items from the coast. Can he appraise everything he has? He put several pearls, red moss, and something else on the table, and Kim exclaimed that this could not be. Are all these really from the coast? Even at headquarters you can't find such black S-rank pearls, and 3 of them at once. There are also giant clams from the demon realm. Assistant Park examined the clam, and when it spat in his face, he exclaimed in shock. So they are even alive? Kim took the red moss and said that this is an essential ingredient for high-grade potions, and his assistant asked if this is the ultra-rare plant that was discovered not long ago. MC asked if this is enough to cover the cost of production. Manager Kim told him that this is not just enough. He can buy the entire building for it and even more. Assistant Park said he'd still rather bring the appraisal device from the lab, and Kim agreed. Items of such high value should be appraised with high-quality equipment. The guy ran off, and Dowoon turned his attention to the shelf, and seeing a mandrake in a capsule there, asked, didn't he say they didn't have any mandrakes? There was one right there. Kim replied that this mandrake had been dead for about 10 years, its medicinal properties long lost. He'd always been interested in studying mandrakes, so he'd saved it. MC took the capsule and said he could tell this mandrake was alive. He was surprised, not understanding what he was talking about. And then he released his mana and asked, do you see how it reacts when you feed it mana? The mandrake had exhausted its demonic energy and fallen into a coma. It would be better to give it more mana. Kim was shocked by this and exclaimed that it was impossible. He personally fed it mana. Suddenly the door swung open, and Director An came in with his assistants to check on how things were going. He looked around and noticed that his office was like a slum, like a moneylender's den. He was informed that some extraordinary items had arrived in the slums. Kim became nervous and wondered if Assistant Park had already contacted Director An. He noticed that he had arrived so quickly, and he said that, unlike him, he had excellent subordinates. The twins had special abilities and they worked twice as fast. He noticed Do-eun and asked if he was the one who brought those items. He was the executive director of An Gi-jeong from the Alchemy Association, a branch of the Golden City, and he was inviting him to the Golden City with him. He would make sure he was well taken care of. He frowned and thought that he had just become friends with manager Kim. Why was he bothering him? Ji-jeong said that in this backwater, there was simply no one to appreciate him. If he signed an exclusive contract with him, he would receive an advance bonus and tax breaks. The MC wasn't listening at all. A spot on his face caught his attention, and he asked if that thing on his nose was a wart. He confirmed it, and then he asked what connected him to An Bokdeok. The man laughed joyfully and asked, "So he knows his grandfather?" Of course he did. He was an honorary recipient of the World Gold Medal, and he was his own grandson. Do-eun grinned and remarked that they really did have rotten genes. He remembered his days in the lab, or rather, how An Bokdeok bullied him and the other kids. He looked at him furiously, and Bokdeok, waving his whip, said that a monster, even a human one, is looking for a mother. But he's a chimera. His kin are in the demon realm. Maybe he should just open the gate and throw him straight there? He laughed, telling him to beg his mommy to save him. At that moment, MC most vividly remembered the nasty wart on his nose. Right now, he released his mana, bringing his grandson to his knees, and asked, "So, does that mean he's following in his grandfather's footsteps? He destroys people with power, taking everything he wants when he can't contain his greed." The man said he didn't understand what he was talking about, and he threateningly advised him to think carefully about answering his next question. Does the TDA lab still exist? He told him he'd never heard of such a lab, and he asked if he knew about the illegal Chimera Research Lab, where Bokdeok worked as a senior researcher. Kim was surprised. He couldn't even imagine that a gold prize winner was involved in shady dealings. Ji-jeong said that one shouldn't speak ill of the dead. His grandfather dedicated his entire life to research and raising the next generation at the university. After retiring, he donated his entire fortune to the families of the Gate victims, and was even awarded the Gold Peace Prize for this. Do-eun chuckled and noted that after killing so many children behind the scenes, he decided to publicly repent. By the way, he assumed that he would live longer, since he was awakened, but he died earlier. Is it all about the injuries he received from falling out of the window? Gi-jeong was very surprised and asked how he found out about it. This was not known to the public. He told him that he was the one who pushed him because he turned the kidnapped children into chimeras. He threatened to push them into the gate, so he decided to push him first. He will give him a chance when he returns. Let him read about his grandfather and the TDA research lab. Let him learn everything, and he will find him when the time comes. When he left, MC immersed himself in memories. Who would have thought that he would meet An Bokdeok's grandson here? He was first subjected to biological experiments to turn into a chimera when he was 9 years old. Monsterization began in his 20s. The memories from that moment are a little hazy. Since he was in a world without civilization, he could only follow orders and instincts without being aware of himself or the reasons for his actions. A lot of time had passed since then. The lab had probably been renamed several times by now. Manager Kim interrupted him from his thoughts. He happily entered the room and thanked him for waiting. His purified water for the mana vessel, made from mandrake roots, was ready. He handed him 2 vials, and he said contentedly that his speed was enviable. No wonder he was an A-plus class alchemist. It took him about 30 minutes. He answered him that the ingredients were very good. That's why it happened so quickly. After that, he took out a calculator, saying that he would help him with the payment for the remaining ingredients. MC thought he was quite capable. It was good that he had approached him. He asked, how about signing a contract with him? He would give him all the remaining ingredients needed for synthesis. He would get the ingredients, and he would simply do the synthesis. He stared at him in surprise and asked in disbelief, he's giving him all this? A contract, too. Do-eun pointed out that he himself had said that an entire building could be bought with this. Wasn't that a good deal? Kim burst into tears with such happiness and said that he was from the slums himself. When he was younger, his parents took out a large private loan. He said that he would pay it off for them, but no matter how much he struggled, he always got stuck in the same place. How could he repay him for such kindness? He smiled and thought, so he's already worried about this. He would need him in the future. To calm him down, he said that they could just work together. After which he decided to go back, hoping that everything was okay with them. But things were really bad with Jia now. She attacked her brother, and he thought it was his mistake. He should have foreseen that Jia would lose her temper. He called her name, asking her to pull herself together, and she responded with only a quiet growl. Immediately after, she threw him aside, causing him to hit the rocks, and he thought he was too late. Nari and Q leaned over him, asking if he was okay, and he mentally told Do-eun not to worry, he would keep his promise to him. After all, he had already saved them once. He flapped his wings and rushed towards his sister, tearfully asking her to be happy in the next life. They both prepared their sharp claws to strike, and when it was about to happen, a huge jellyfish fell on Jia from above and crushed her. Baeom was completely perplexed, and MC, who had thrown the jellyfish off, asked, wasn't it just supposed to be knocked out? Nari was very happy to see him, and Baeom called out to him with displeasure, saying that this was his little sister. Why is he treating the girl like this? He asked if he had a better way to control her. Baeom didn't argue and wiped away his tears, asking what was with the medicine. He showed him 2 vials and said that, as he promised, he got it. Evening came, the guys sat around the fire and began to fry fish, and the vials were already empty. Jia and Nari were lying on the carpet and sleeping. Jia finally woke up. She opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw in front of her was a child drooling. She got up and grabbed her head, thinking, is this a dream? She saw her brother sitting by the fire with some guy, and when this stranger looked at her, she immediately grabbed herself in fear and exclaimed, who is he? Because of the scream, Nari got up and asked, has Aunt Sparrow woke up yet? She was surprised that she called her that, and Baeom happily called out to her and asked her to check her mana vessel. She was surprised and listened to her feelings. The vessel was normal, and her face had also returned to normal. She confusedly asked what happened and who all these people were, and he asked if she knew who they were. She had really wanted to meet him. Had too much time really passed? Her eyes widened in surprise. She looked at the stranger again and remembered the boy from the forest. She exclaimed, is this really number 17? Baeom confirmed it, and she, dumbfounded, said that he had saved them again. Dawoon turned to her brother asking if there was any more red moss, and he told him that was all for today. Jia noted that this was indeed number 17, 0 empathy. She removed the mask from her head and smiled widely, thanking him for saving her. And then, Nari saw a glow. Glowing things were floating on the surface of the water, and she excitedly told the others about it. Jia put her mask back on, as she was embarrassed, and said that they were sea fairies. They are coastal monsters that live in the depths of the sea. They named them that way because they look like fairies when they play. At night, they come to the surface to play, and when the sun rises, they return home. If you follow the sea fairies, you can find a yellow sparkling quartz. And then MC realized that he had completely forgotten his original goal. He asked how long until dawn, and finding out that the night was in full swing, he decided to go for a swim. He hadn't swum in a long time. After some time, Director Han called a meeting and asked what was wrong with that mechanical creature and where it was. He was told that about 10 B-class hunters had come across this creature in the forest area, but no one managed to catch it. At the moment, it seems to be hiding somewhere along the coast. All the A-class hunters who recently returned from there are suffering from amnesia, although the location data of the mechanical creature remains on their tracking devices. And then the director received a call from An Gijiao. He answered the call and said that he had not heard from him for a long time, and he angrily said that he called him to ask him something. Does he know anything about the TDA research lab? He answered him that he had never heard of such a lab, and he said that it was an illegal lab that operated a long time ago. The director interrupted him and said that he could not say that it was a research lab. Professor Bok Deok taught him to be an honest researcher, and he, Han Young-do, will never forget the lessons of his dear teacher. He ended the call and thought, why would his grandson suddenly mention an illegal lab? There was a knock at the door, and one of the researchers joyfully entered the room, exclaiming that it was a success. As he had said, the combination of liquid metal and mandrake produced a liquid metal mandrake. He showed him the result of the experiment, and he thought that mandrakes were monsters with an exceptionally developed sense of bloodline. They possessed incredible sensory abilities. To all this, they added liquid metal, which was extremely sticky. A chimera combining these two properties would detect the mechanical creature faster than any tracking device. He excitedly waved his hand, ordering them to triple the reward and place an announcement among the elite A-class hunters. The masterpiece of his life, he would find it no matter what. Meanwhile, Baeom stood on the coast and thought about Do-woon. What a weirdo he was. Last night, he invited them over. He had an excellent cook, even though he was bald. Baeom asked, did he also live in the demon realm? He confirmed this and said that it was quite nice here. He just needed to get used to it. He asked why he needed that. He could have gone to the human world. MC asked if he really wanted to go back. He swallowed nervously and told him that he didn't have any particularly good memories of that life, although sometimes he thinks about how everything has changed. Do-woon said that maybe the spell cast on his body could be removed. He immediately asked how it could be done, and he told him that there was an alchemist who controlled Kim. It was he who prepared purified water, so he was quite capable. He wants him to research spells. Let him tell him if he is interested in it. There is a difference between not trying and not being able to. Baeom lowered his head and let out a quiet sob. He burst into tears and asked why he always helps them. After all, they have done nothing for him. He answered him that sometimes he looks at them, the twins, and wonders if there's anything more important in this world than survival. He thought that by helping them, he can find the answer. Baeom returned from his memories. He saw air bubbles on the surface of the water and thought, so fast. His sister jumped out from under the water with 2 ropes in her hands. She threw one of them to him, and he asked, confused, what it was. She didn't explain anything, and told him to just pull it, and he pulled the rope towards himself, wondering why it was so heavy. The ropes tightened, and from under the water they pulled out a huge net with quartz. Baeom was shocked that they pulled out so many stones. Then Do-woon and Nari appeared from under the water. He looked at the girl with a smile and said that he hadn't swam like this in a long time. It was fun, and she agreed with him. The moment of diving was imprinted in her memory. The sea fairy's house looked like a yellow palace. They will still be able to swim there, right? MC confirmed this, and they climbed out onto the shore and Bayom asked how they were going to carry all this into the forest. Dowoon was also thinking about this, and suddenly a huge shadow of a parrot eagle flashed above them. Nari was delighted, and Jia said that he only looked so cool from afar. But if she saw him up close, she'd change her mind. He is 4 meters tall and has a disgusting character, so they tried to avoid this feathered idiot. Seeing Dowoon's smile, Bayom guessed what he wanted to do, and he said he just thought they could use a truck. It was perfect. Time passed. Jizeok sat and meditated, and the mandrakes watched him. He literally felt his mana vessel increase in size. At this rate, he could fulfill his dream of becoming an A-class hunter. He wondered when Dowoon would return. And suddenly something fell behind him. It was an iron mandrake, and he was very angry because he didn't fall himself. Jizeok had never seen such a thing before and was therefore surprised, and then one of the hunters kicked the mandrake and told him to make his face simpler, and he would do it himself. One of them looked at Jizeok and asked, "Is that really Jizeok?" His friend told them to look at his bald head. It was definitely him. What's with his clothes? Is he, like, a savage or something? They laughed, and he bashfully covered his bald head and thought that these were the same A-class thugs he encountered when he went to take the exam. And what were they doing here? 3 formidable mandrakes came to his defense, and one of the hunters exclaimed in surprise, "Are these wild mandrakes? How much do 3 of those cost?" The guy approached them and asked with a friendly smile, "Are they mad that they entered their territory?" He extended his hand to one of them, calling him a good boy, and Jiseok gritted his teeth, thinking, these are Dowoon's mandrakes, he has to protect them. But the eldest of the mandrakes was able to defend himself. He stomped his foot menacingly, and there was a roar, and the villains were thrown aside. They were confused about where this earthquake came from, but in fact, it was just Jia and Bayom landing. She asked, "Are they still there?" And he asked in response, "How many more houses are there in the forest area?" Of course they are. Meanwhile, MC was getting home on a parrot. Because of the load, it was flying very slowly, and Dowoon asked if maybe he was too harsh on it. He was starting to worry. Meanwhile, Jiseok grabbed his shining head in shock and thought, why did this even happen? These are disaster-level monsters that live on the coast. He remembered that Dowoon and Nari went there and became worried. Did something happen to them? If so, he'll have to, no matter how much he wants to, team up with these idiots. The two pushed the hunters aside and approached him, asking if he was by any chance Dowoon's chef. He was bald, just like he'd said. Jiseok screamed loudly in fear and backed away, wondering why monsters spoke in human voices. He quickly came to his senses and asked, did they call him chef? Do they know Dowoon? Bayom answered that of course they knew him. They were friends. Jiseok was completely shocked. Were disaster-level monsters his friends? What kind of life was he living? Bayom nodded towards the hunters and asked, who are these? They didn't look like guests. And then Jiseok realized this was his chance. He answered with a sinister grin that they were thieves, wanting to steal Dowoon's mandrakes. The hunters were scared. They realized what awaited them. An hour passed. The parrot landed with a crash in the clearing near the house, and Nari cheerfully jumped off it, saying that home is always better after all. After that, the poor parrot fell to the ground, exhausted, and MC wondered if it had been that hard. He patted its head, telling it to rest, and Jia said she couldn't believe he'd actually tamed that creature. Q's head was spinning so much that he clumsily slid off the parrot's back along its wing and said he hadn't flown that high in a long time. He hit something and, seeing a hunter's boot in front of him, exclaimed in shock, what happened here? Dowoon asked, are there 3 A-class hunters here? What happened here? Bayom answered that there had been an attempt to steal the mandrakes, and he remarked that it was all suspicious. Bayom rubbed his neck in confusion and said he wanted to tell him something. He exchanged glances with his sister, and she, understanding his hint, took Nari away under the pretext of going to see the waterfall and the gorge. Bayom watched them go and said that the lab was still looking for Kim Nari. These hunters, it seemed, were also on their orders. MC realized he was talking about the same lab where Jiseok got the tracking device. He knew they would send someone. It looks like Nari has a special tracking sensor that works even in the demon world. He said that he and Nari were on the coast. How did they end up here? Bayom showed him a mandrake and said it was all because of this little guy. He took it and asked, is it a mandrake with liquid metal mixed in? So that's how they tracked Nari. Bayom said that he heard liquid metal is drawn to its own kind, and Dowoon noted that that's why this guy was drawn here, to the other mandrake that lived with them. Bayom said that they were planning to head towards the coast afterward, and he didn't think they would give up on searching for Nari anytime soon. MC thought he'd have to come up with something, and the mandrakes suddenly called him. They started pointing at themselves and waving their hands, and he realized they wanted him to give them their kinsman. He handed them the metal mandrake, and the eldest brother waved his hand menacingly, pointing to his pocket. He realized he'd forgotten about it. How did he know what was in his pocket? He took the exhausted mandrake out of his pocket, and Bayom asked, who is this weakling? He answered that it used to belong to an alchemist, who agreed to look after it. When he gave it to him, he cried so much, but he knew it would only be best for him. Meanwhile, the mandrakes dug holes for the new family members. They slowly trudged toward them, planted their bodies in the soil, and sighed with bliss. Beom remarked that these guys had a wonderful camaraderie, and Dawoon said that fortunately, they weren't attached to territory. They'd get used to it quickly. By the way, where's Jiseok? He should have been back by now. Suddenly, his plaintive voice rang out from the sky. Jia flew up to them with Nari and Jiseok in her arms, and he waved his arms with tears in his eyes, and said that he had finally arrived. He pounced on him with hugs, saying he was so worried, but he immediately pushed him away and asked what had happened to him. Jia sighed heavily and said that he had been struggling in the water until the fish bit him. It was a terrible sight. He laughed awkwardly and said that he had wanted to treat the guests to some fish, and as always, nothing good had come of it. Nari happily said that Aunt Sparrow was cool. She had helped him out of trouble. Jiseok told them to wait while he prepared something for them, and then he heard a languid sigh next to him. He glanced at the parrot, surprised he hadn't noticed such a huge thing right away. He was terrified and exclaimed, "Where did that parrot come from?" MC said he'd explain everything later, but first, food. Jiseok excitedly left to cook, while Nari approached the new tenants, deeply intrigued by the metal mandrake. She touched its leaves with her finger, and they reacted, causing her to purse her lips nervously. Finally, the food was ready, and the siblings were amazed by the divine dish on the table. It was Nam Jiseok's signature kimchi curry. The guy smugly thought that even though it was made from store-bought curry and ready-made kimchi, he generously added pork, a bunch of vegetables, and stirred non-stop for an hour to prevent burning. They all sat down at the table, and Beom said it smelled wonderful, while Jiseok eagerly awaited their assessment. As soon as Jia tried a piece, she delightedly asked, "So that's what it's like? The legendary meeting of East and West?" Beom said, "It's so spicy, but so delicious. Aren't India and Korea part of the East?" Dawoon smiled wryly and wondered, "Is he serious?" He noticed that Nari was sitting with a sad face and not eating, and asked, "What's wrong?" She told him that she just wasn't hungry. She had no appetite. After that, she left the table, saying she was going to bed, and he thought that it was probably all because of that metal chimera. Maybe he should assign her something to do so she wouldn't dwell on it. Time passed. Someone stole the mandrake, and meanwhile, they finished dinner. Beom put his hands on his stomach and said that after all, being a professional chef is cool. He hadn't eaten so much in a long time. His sister said that she no longer felt like a bird, but like a pig. MC got up from the table and suggested they take a walk, and at the same time fix the fence, and Jia said that he could entrust the stone cutting to them. Suddenly, MC felt something, and immediately turned around in fear. Nari was standing in front of the open gates. She did this because she thought that if she stayed here, her uncle would also be in danger, so they would return to where they came from. Dawoon ran into the house and called out to her excitedly, and she hugged the mandrake close and said goodbye to her uncle with tears in her eyes. She headed for the portal, but MC stopped her and asked where she was going. This was her home, after all. Jia and Beom, who had also run to the house, breathed a sigh of relief, and Nari, crying, threw herself into Dawoon's arms, and he thought that children really were growing up fast. It seemed he needed to keep a close eye on her now. After that, they sat her down at the table, and she, her eyes puffy from crying, began to eat ramen. As soon as she tried a bite, she pounced on the noodles with gusto and told Jiseok that it was better than last time. He remarked that ramen is the only thing that saves you at night, and Jia angrily said that she almost ran away from home. If she did that again, her big sister would teach her a lesson. She replied that she understood everything and that it was her fault. And after finishing the broth, she stuck out her tongue and exclaimed that it was so spicy. Jiseok put a carton of milk on the table and told her to drink it. His mother always says, "This is the best cure for spicy food." Beom noted with surprise that they were given this in the lab, and Jiseok told them that he had more, so they could take that. He collected the dishes, and told the boss that he would clean everything up and get to work as he ordered, and Beom asked, "Will they work on the quartz in the meantime?" They left, and after drinking several bottles of milk, Nari apologized to Dawoon for making him worry. He told her that she had nothing to apologize for, and thought that it was not she who was to blame, but those who created and used her. He asked her to tell him about her friends from the coconut tribe. What are they like? She was a little confused, and he thought that when he took down the TDA lab, he would need to make sure that they weren't harmed. She told him there were 3 of them, and they were close, and he decided not to ask about the lab's location. Nam Jiseok already knew. Now he wondered if his employee had completed the task. Meanwhile, Jiseok decided to mock those hunters. He grabbed one of them by the bandage over his mouth, and thought that the boss had said that, apparently, they couldn't use mana yet. He tore off the bandage, and the guy excitedly asked him to wait. They could come to an agreement. Let him let them go, and then they would thank him generously. They had savings that could buy a house in the Golden City. Of course, they wouldn't say a word about what happened to anyone. Jiseok said that for a deal to be made, the parties needed to be equal. After which, with a grin, he showed him a black card, and added that he wasn't the type to fall for small change. He exclaimed in surprise, "Is this the same black card for high society? Where did he get it?" He told him that it didn't matter now. It was time for him to take revenge for the promotion exam. He nervously said that it was a mistake, and he asked threateningly, Does he think he'll believe that? He himself said that he was a stubborn idiot who doesn't know when to give up. And who was he? Everyone knows what scum they are in their world. What's worse? Failing the exam or beating up the weak, taking money, and deceiving people? He took something out of his pocket and said that these were forgetfulness pills. The boss himself gave them to him. He didn't even know how strong their effect was. The guy was scared because he knew that this was enough to completely erase his memory, and Jiseok threateningly said that he wanted his rotten nature to start from scratch. He ordered him to open his mouth, and he screamed loudly in fear. The next day came. Q was walking with Nari and Sasa, mumbling that he had such a hard time looking after the children, and the MC told Baeom about his plans. He exclaimed in surprise. Was he serious? He confirmed it and said that he would take Jiseok and Q with him. While they were gone, he would look after the house and Kim Nari. He agreed, and Jiseok, putting on his fashionable shoes, approached Dowoon and happily said that he was ready. The MC grinned and noticed that he was practically beaming with joy. What happened? He happily said that he himself told him that he would introduce him to the alchemist. Maybe he could solve his problem. Baeom realized that he was talking about the bald head, and his sister asked, "Are they going there like that? Maybe they should disguise themselves?" Dowoon noted that this was a good idea, and Jiseok was perplexed. Why a disguise to meet an alchemist? Jia took off her mask and gave it to Dowoon, telling him to at least put this on. Seeing her face, Jiseok fell into a stupor. His heart began to dance and he touched his chest, wondering what was wrong with him. Why was his heart pounding so wildly? He saw her smile and wondered if this is what love at first sight looks like. In fact, Jia wasn't smiling right now. For some reason, she was punching her brother. Jiseok immediately dropped to one knee in front of her and said that he was an impulsive person. If he decided to do something, he would do it right away. He decided to ask directly, what is her ideal boyfriend? Dowoon and Baeom almost choked at these words, and while he trembled with excitement, they both began to watch the unfolding show. Baeom said that she was like that too. If you ask her directly, she will answer without a second thought. Jia thought for a moment and said her ideal was someone impressive and a good dancer. A noble peacock immediately popped into Jiseok's head, and she said that, generally speaking, the fluffier the feathers, the better. These words struck him squarely in the bald spot. He immediately called out to the boss and said they needed to go to the alchemist immediately. He agreed and asked if he minded if they stopped somewhere along the way. He was willing to do anything, as long as they got to the alchemist eventually. After a while, a huge portal appeared over the city, frightening the people. Then a bird of the same size flew out, and they immediately ran to report it to the guild. Jiseok asked why he needed this monster parrot. People get scared, after all. MC asked, why go on foot? He didn't bother to bother, and asked where they were going, and he replied that he should tell him. The guy didn't understand him, but he smiled and thought that the sky was blue, and the bird too. Let them call him Blue. Meanwhile, Nyundu called a meeting, where he was informed that all the hunters they had sent had returned with amnesia. He asked what about the Chimera tracker, and one of the researchers said that they had lost it. Nyungdu slammed his palm on the table in rage, frightening him, and thought that if they didn't find this mechanical organism, not only would their government funding be cut and all their investments taken away, but they wouldn't leave alive. The man nervously reached into the inside pocket of his robe and said that they had found this in the hunter's clothes, an oblivion pill with a note saying, "See you soon." This angered him even more, and he exclaimed, who dared to pull such a nasty thing? Let them find it and bring it to him immediately. But that wasn't necessary. He came to him himself. The parrot smashed the windows and flew straight into the meeting room, causing a loud crash and dust. MC dusted off his clothes and said the landing was still unstable due to the left wing. After clearing the lab, he'd handle the treatment. Manager Kim should handle it. He looked around and asked, so who's the lab director? A little earlier, just before storming the laboratory, the protagonist said the institute was located on the middle terrace of Mount Haebong. Jiseok asked, somewhere between the slums and the Golden City? He replied that it was a little further, and that would take them right there. Jiseok asked, is he sure this is a good idea? Maybe he didn't know because he hadn't been there, but this isn't some ordinary laboratory. Nari, no. They created a cyber orgasm and they were featured on TV. And isn't that a crime? He's an honest man. The protagonist asked, really? Then they'll see what's there. Jiseok thought, okay, he must have some kind of plan. But isn't this creature's tail strange? Dowoon answered, yes, feathers don't grow on the left side. It's been like that from the very beginning. It was because of its tail that it was exiled and escaped from its fellows. Then he saved the creature, so it obeys him? The huge bird nodded and was happy to be talking to Dowoon. Jiseok asked again, but if it wasn't growing feathers, why exercise it? He replied, did he see? They were obsessed with beautiful tail feathers. When the bird had previously seen these amazing tails on its fellows, it had been surprised, and at that moment, those same fellows began attacking this one. This is probably why he was expelled from the pack. They had always been aiming for the tail. Jiseok remained silent and understood what it was like when something everyone had wasn't growing. After a while, the protagonist asked, Aren't they supposed to go there? Jiseok confirmed that it was, and Dawoon replied that was excellent and asked his bird to fly straight ahead. Jiseok asked fearfully, right? What was he talking about? Blue accelerated at incredible speed, and Jiseok became very frightened and cried out. Dawoon asked him to hold on tight, as the tail meant it wouldn't have the softest landing. Snot and drool trickled from Jiseok's face due to the strong wind. A moment later, an explosion rocked the building, sending up thick dust. The office staff wondered what was going on. Had a war really started? The man covered his mouth to breathe and muttered that the dust was making it hard to see. What was that? Suddenly, he saw Blue next to him and cried out in fear. He fell to the floor and, recovering, asked what a poisonous parrot was doing here. Suddenly, the two of them were engulfed in magical nets, unable to escape. The guys wondered what that was. Was it really a spiderweb? At that moment, the protagonist approached them and said that it looked like almost everyone had been caught. Jiseok asked again why they hadn't entered through the main entrance but were coming this way. He replied that the lab director was usually on the very top landing. He wondered if he was up to something suspicious. They asked again, "Isn't this the TDA lab?" The lab assistant asked again, "Human? Who were they?" The protagonist replied that he was Nari's guardian, and the staff began asking, "Nari, who is she?" One of them remained silent and didn't answer, and the protagonist noticed. Dark magical powers also appeared around him, and he wondered, magic? That there's some strange guy here. Sometime later, in the Golden City, Unsu and Bako were discussing pressing matters at the Hunters Association. He asked, "So, how's the B-rank preparation going? Is everything alright? If he tried this task, he'd kick him out of the house, so he should remember that." Bako lounged on the couch, chewing gum, and replied that even his grandfather was still in S-rank, and he was the chairman of the Hunters Association. He was just over 20 years old. Wasn't that too early? He should at least give him some pocket money. Unsu replied that he grew up as an only grandson and was very spoiled. He was already 84 years old. Maybe it's time for someone else to take over this position? At that moment, Baiko tensed, thinking about why he was talking about this again. Unsu continued, saying that in his youth, he'd seen awakened people throwing themselves into fire for humanity and had created a Hunters Association to support them. He wanted to somehow help protect the world. He approached the window and asked, "What's happening now?" The awakened have stopped taking risks. Most are only interested in what makes money. He's not saying that because he's an awakened person, he has to send them to their deaths. Chimera research was originally created to protect them. But to hire Chimera hunters, he needs to pay the Institute a huge amount of money. That's the reality. The poor areas remain defenseless, but hunters need bread too. Can anyone blame them? He simply can't forget the heroes of the old school. A world in which life depends on money is simply wrong. In times like these, the association should stand even stronger. But people chase positions and money. Instead of a chairman, they see only a tool for a monopoly on power. He, a late riser and a low-ranking man, is considered a weak chairman. At this point, Baiko listened silently and didn't move. Unsu remarked that he, Baiko, had awakened young. At this point, Baiko became incredibly angry and clenched his teeth in rage. Suddenly, a subordinate burst into their office and shouted, "Chairman, this is Advisor Kim." He asked again, "What happened?" "A poisonous parrot has appeared in the slums. It's urgent," Baiko asked in fear. "A poisonous parrot?" Unsu also tensed up and shouted, "Could it really have happened without a signal for spontaneous appearance and return? And where are the hunters?" The guy replied that they had sent a notification to the departments, but no one was rushing to help them. Unsu realized that this was probably because this was a request from the slums and they had no support. He slammed his fist on the table and shouted for his subordinate to contact all nearby research labs immediately. He would personally go there. After these words, he decided to leave the office, and Baiko shouted that he would go there too. The protagonist extended his hand toward the man, who he considered strange, and couldn't understand what was wrong with him. He tied him even tighter with numerous threads, and suddenly Jiseok asked again, "What?" At that moment, the man's glasses shattered and flew off, and everything around him glowed with a bright red aura. Numerous strange-looking drops remained on the floor, and Jiseok asked again, "Could it really be liquid metal?" His pet replied that it simply couldn't be. Could he himself really be a chimera? Everyone around him, even the lab staff, were dumbfounded by what they saw and cried out, "Could it really be that their director was a chimera all along?" The protagonist silently watched what was happening, and suddenly Chimera asked, "How dare he do this?" He transformed into a terrifying creature that screamed loudly and asked what he'd turned his lab into. He'd kill them all right now. The protagonist sensed danger and thought about it. He was the director after all. Liquid metal, the same as Nari, but it didn't look like a typical mechanical being. Had he really been conducting biological experiments on his own body? At that moment, Yuri addressed him and said that he'd just done something incredible. He'd managed to establish a mental connection. The protagonist was dumbfounded, and at that moment, Chimera remembered conducting experiments on the child lying on his desk. He took the syringe in his hands and with an ominous expression, said that if only he could do better, he'd do whatever it took. At that moment, The protagonist pounced on him with fists and a confident expression, and asked if he'd been kidnapping children for the experiments. Chimera, frightened, asked again, "Children?" He meant ragamuffins from the slums. Those scum should be grateful for the chance he gave them. After these words, the protagonist slammed him into the ground, sending a pile of stones flying everywhere. Chimera was making the last sounds of exhaustion and realized that his body was no longer cooperating and that he urgently needed to liquefy. Dawoon asked, did he even dare open his mouth? He should sit in his room for a while. Dawoon was amazed at how much mana he had. It was simply unthinkable. He continued to press on Chimera's face, which mentally begged him to stop as it was so painful. He begged him to stop, and after a moment, he began to turn into a small lump, asking, "No, is this his body? He's being sucked somewhere." A moment later, he turned into a small ball that remained on the floor. Jiseok's mouth dropped open in shock, and he asked again. A human turned into a ball. Dawoon took the ball in his hands and said that now he needed some information. Would they mind, or should he make similar balls out of them? The lab technicians looked at him with fear and didn't object. Beom, who was flying with the protagonist, muttered, "So, and Bondok was once Myungdoo's mentor?" He replied that it all started when Han Myungdoo, whose research Bondok stole materials containing living specimens and fled somewhere. He transformed himself into a chimera to rejuvenate himself. Human greed is truly boundless. The protagonist realized that Myungdoo's memories contained nothing about the TDA. So, does that mean he really knew nothing? But they wouldn't be able to track Nari. Its programming was embedded in the lab's system, so he easily made the necessary adjustments. He asked one of the detained lab technicians, "So they just need to break this?" He answered, "Yes." From then on, it was up to Jiseok. He'd clean everything up, especially since he had Blue. He told the guy he'd found himself in a terrible situation next to Blue. All that remained was Myungdoo's legacy, the fruits of his illegal experiments. He entered the room and realized that this must be it. When he slammed the floor hard, a multitude of columns lit up around him, each containing living creatures. He was dumbfounded, and Beom declared what a freak he was. He really had used those poor dead children. What were they going to do now? Dawoon was silent for a moment, lost in thought. Once, when the doctors gathered over him, they shouted that the object had no side effects. They needed to dissect it and figure out why it happened. Another doctor asked, "Is he crazy? Does he want to slaughter the goose that lays the golden eggs? Does he even realize how much money he'll make if he passes himself off as a natural awakened? And what if he dies, and not even his body remains? Better they cut him open now. Then at least there'll be some benefit." The protagonist approached one of the capsules and, placing his hand on it, said, "Let them at least rest in peace now." Suddenly, he heard footsteps and turned around, asking, "Is that the guy?" The fox smelled a familiar scent and mentioned it, surprising MC. Can he talk? He hadn't heard that from Nari. He whispered to Q that he smelled Nari, and he replied that it was actually from him. He washes every day after all. The protagonist asked, does he happen to know about the mechanical creature? The fox who approached them asked again, "A mechanical creature? Have you met her?" He replied that they live together in the lower world, so everything is fine. The fox wagged his tail with joy. Is it true? He couldn't hold back his tears. He had waited so long for this, wanting to hear at least once that she was alive and well. The protagonist wondered, that's her best friend, the fox, right? So it was definitely him. Dawoon asked again, "Is there anyone else here besides that?" He turned around and told the guys to come out right now. Several interesting creatures crawled out from around the corner, and he asked again, "Is that a tree and an ant?" When some more creatures emerged, Dawoon asked, "Are those gophers or cacti?" So they were all the remaining chimeras? The guys answered, "Yes, the combat types died or were sold. Only they remained." The protagonist realized that luckily they had netherworld mana, which meant they could return there without any problems. The guys asked again in surprise, "He's talking about the netherworld?" After some time, the laboratory had completely burned down, the flames spreading throughout the room. Unsu, who had arrived at the scene of the fire with his grandson, asked if the slums had been the target. What was going on here? And why did they target the institute specifically? Baiko turned to his grandfather and said there was a poisonous parrot and someone was sitting there. It was the protagonist, silently observing their reaction. He asked if the researchers had been evacuated. Jiseok smiled and replied, yes, as he had ordered, they were all safe. They had also confirmed that no one else was in the building. He thought that was good. The TDA lab was legal. The scientists simply didn't know who Myungdoo really was. Jiseok asked again, but maybe they should have at least erased the memory? After all, they had seen them. Dawoon replied that that was precisely why they shouldn't have done that. Jiseok, surprised, asked what he meant. The protagonist looked ahead and asked, does he know them? Jiseok realized that this was the head of the Hunters Association, Unsu, and his grandson. At that moment, Unsu asked himself in bewilderment, seriously? Was he really flying at a parrot? But who was he to do that? It seemed they had responded to an alarm. The protagonist wondered if he'd heard that name before. Suddenly, he remembered and realized. After realizing it, he smiled and took the magic ball in his hand, then dropped it straight down. Jiseok was startled and screamed. What was he doing? These were high-ranking people. He reached out and caught the ball. When he examined it, Beiho asked again, what was that? He didn't think he'd ever see it again. It was a mana sealing technique. The seal placed upon him can only be removed with mana greater than the power of the seal's creator. But who sealed Director Myungdoo himself, and why? At that moment, One of them ran up to him and shouted, "Chairman!" Fortunately, there were no casualties, but the researchers are giving strange testimony. People say Mengdu was a chimera, and the attacker helped them escape the fire. They don't understand what happened. At that moment, Unsu was stunned and wondered if that child was still alive. After these thoughts, he looked up at the same bird. The protagonist asked Jizeok to return to the slum, and he replied, "So, are they finally going to someone who can help solve his problem?" He wanted to talk calmly, but it seemed that if the association intervened, the fuss would only escalate. So what should they do? Sometime later, in the duty room of the Alchemy Association's slum branch, Kim was sleeping soundly when he suddenly heard a strange sound and woke up. He wondered what that noise was. Had someone really arrived at such an hour? When he opened the door, he saw a strange man whose mask had fallen off, and he greeted him with bewilderment. Kim was terrified and shouted loudly that he was a thief. It was Jiseok, who removed his mask and replied that he should be careful and not make any noise, as this thing was for his use. He should behave calmly. After all, he was the manager. His mouth dropped open in shock. He asked again, "Dawoon, what was he doing here at this hour?" He replied that it was nothing special, and that he should just go with him to the underworld right now. Meanwhile, Nari, Baeom, and Jia were sitting at the table, discussing how they would first make a fence out of quartz and glowstones. Next, they would cut the quartz pieces to the right size and drill holes. Then they would insert polished glowstones, and they would have what they needed. When Nari saw the preliminary result, she was dumbfounded with admiration. She said, "Uncle Sparrow, this is simply beautiful." Jia confirmed that she hadn't thought this was even possible. At that moment, they began to discuss whether making the fence longer would make it even better. "I wonder how many of these stones they'll need." At that moment, Jia noticed something odd and turned around. A magical gate appeared behind them, and she realized it seemed someone was returning. It was a bunch of animals from the lab that had teleported to their forest. The guys were surprised and asked if they were really chimeras. Did Dawoon send them? They didn't look very dangerous. At that moment, Jia looked into the distance and saw Nari run around the corner. She asked if something had happened to her. Nari was scared and didn't know what to do. The animals themselves started discussing among themselves if everything was okay. Bielm asked what was wrong. Was Sasa afraid of strangers? Jia replied that wasn't true. Rather, it was finding out who was in charge here. Bielm was surprised. Had the tree really passed by Sasa? It seemed to like something. It seemed to like their well-kept garden. He was a sapling after all, but other new acquaintances were waiting for him at the garden. A bright flash of light erupted, and a multitude of stones flew around. The owners were already there, glaring angrily at the new tree. When all 5 of them were together, they looked like a real gang. Meanwhile, the protagonist thanked Blue and told him to rest a bit. Jizeok stretched out and replied that home was still the best place in the world. The manager Kim was shocked, looked ahead and shouted, "Did they really build a house in the netherworld? Is this really a home? But surely a house in the netherworld is an invaluable object of study. There are 2 rooms here. Where is the entrance and where are the windows? That must be the back of the building." The protagonist grinned and looked ahead, seeing a frightened Nari standing silently behind a tree. He asked if she hadn't made peace with her friends yet. He walked away and told Jizeok and manager Kim to stay here. He'd be back soon. When Dawoon approached Jia and Baeom, they asked if he'd sorted everything out. He handed them the mask and replied, "Yes, by the way, it's a great thing and comfortable to wear." Jia replied that she'd make him one too. But why are they so angry? He didn't even look after his garden. And so they've been standing like this since morning. Wasn't he the one who brought these chimeras? Neither of them was going to give in to the other. At that moment, an ant approached and decided to intervene. Did the light on this ant's tail mean its comrade was in danger? The ant decided to fight and pounced on the sapling, and the guys said that couldn't be true. It was the core's dream. Some of these creatures were delighted by the ant's appearance, which flew past and hit its friend. This greatly surprised those around, and when the ant stopped, it fell to the ground, its head spinning. Baeom said the mandrakes worked well together. Sapling and ant also tried their best. Dawoon said, "Okay, they're done with the initiation ceremony. Only Nari and the fox cub remained, who was already approaching the very tree where Nari stood." The fox cub kept saying that he couldn't be mistaken about that smell. It was her, after all, a mechanical being. He sincerely asks her for forgiveness. Nari blushed with embarrassment and burst into tears without answering. The fox cub said he'd wait for her there. Silence fell between them. One day in the lab, Myungdu asked what she meant by refusing a raiding battle. His subordinate replied that it was because she showed perfect results in training, but in a real fight she always lost. She didn't obey spells, she ignored orders. It seemed to be a matter of character. Myungdu asked again, "Character?" They thought she was a fighting type, but unfortunately, she's far too kind by nature. They could kick her and scream at her, wishing she weren't there. But she wouldn't have harmed them. Her opponents just beat her in droves, and she didn't fight back. He's afraid she'll die like that. Nari's whole body ached. Myungdu kept telling her how stupid she was, and that if her personality was holding her back, they'd fix it. He asked her to move in with a roommate, someone weak who would get along with her, and to whom she would eventually begin to listen. It was precisely this fox cub and the other chimeras. Then, once they became good friends, he should order the roommate to betray her. After some time, that's exactly what happened. There's nothing more painful than a friend's betrayal. When it happened, he asked, "Does she understand now? There are no true friends in life. Next time they'll kill her. So if she wants to live, She should kill herself. After these words, Nari broke free and decided to run away. All the lab members shouted to catch her. She understood that they were friends, and she wouldn't hit her friend. A moment later, she ran out of the lab through the window, realizing that she simply had to get away from there. When she ran into the forest, she burst into tears near a tree. And then the same thing happened. They hugged, and Nari asked why she was crying. The fox cub replied that she missed her. She missed her very much, and she would never ever let her go again. The protagonist, who was watching from afar, asked, "So, are they going back now?" Jiseok replied, "So that's what Nari looked like before. Fine, they'll pretend they didn't notice." Dawoon confirmed that it was good that they made up so quickly. At that moment, Jiseok asked, "Boss, how long do they have to stand there?" Their legs were already swollen. He said they could move, but he didn't want to scare Nari away. The eagle asked, "Who's that next to him? He looks like some kind of chubby guy. And the clothes are weird. Are they pajamas?" The main character almost forgot to introduce him. He is a Class A alchemist. Jia asked in surprise, "Was that really true?" Manager Kim introduced himself and said, "So if it's not too impudent, could he take a couple of their feathers?" At that moment, Beom and Jia were dumbfounded and asked again, did he want their feathers? Or maybe that would make things difficult for them? Eagle replied that it wasn't that, but for some reason they felt awkward. Meanwhile, Bongsu leaned on the table and said that he said it was a really huge blue feathered creature. Even the people from the Hunters Association fled. There was total chaos. Pak asked again, "Is that so?" But she didn't leave the store, so she didn't even notice anything. He said, "By the way, it got a little colder here." Pak told him not to even mention it because it looked like winter was coming. He looked at the plate in front of him in surprise, and Pak said that in this cool weather, hot sweet potatoes were just the thing. Just make sure he eats them with kimchi, otherwise he'll choke. Bongsu thanked her with a smile and said he'd have a good meal now. When he started eating, he felt incredibly warm, and she told him not to be shy because they had plenty of food. He asked sheepishly, "Won't she be eating?" Pak sat down across from him and said she'd already eaten. "By the way, he looks pale. Is he sick?" He replied that he seemed a little ill, apparently from overdoing it with the training. He's taking his pills, but he still has chills. This has been going on for 10 days, by the way. Pak told him to wait. But isn't this awakening? Fever, dizziness, body aches that last for weeks. He's already 17 this year, right? Awakening usually happens right around the end of adolescence. He replied, "Come on, awakening." Pak got angry and exclaimed, "What's wrong with him? Does awakening look at one's lineage before it happens?" He'd even grown up recently. Bongsu asked her not to get his hopes up, because even if he was awakened, what good would he be with a low class? She pressed the bills to his chest, and he clutched them, looking surprised. Pak said he didn't have money for the trip, did he? There was a branch of the Hunters Association in Silver City. They could help him check whether he had awakened or not. Who knows? What if he really had awakened and became an excellent hunter? Bongsu was embarrassed by these words and thanked his aunt, when Pak suddenly exclaimed angrily, what kind of aunt was she to him? He replied that when he grew up and achieved success, he would pay her double. Honestly, thanks to her. Pak asked again, was he doing this on purpose? After a while, Jia sat and crafted special golden logs along with all the creatures present and a chimera. Baeom said they said it was the night shift, but it wasn't particularly hard for them. Baeom came up and said that this idiot was told he could go, but he was still hanging around. Jiseok was incredibly tired and turned blue from exhaustion, shouting that he wasn't training at all, just helping them. Let him leave him alone. The protagonist said, okay, while Manager Kim is treating Bluetail, can they continue working? Jiseok replied, let him wait. He hadn't yet had time to say the most important thing. They said they needed concentration. Let him wait a little. The protagonist asked again, does he want to go home? Let him say that later. I wish I could kill him. Jiseok smiled and replied that youth is here and now. One way or another, if they're going to live here, everyone needs to contribute, no matter how small. Did they all understand? Nari replied that they understood and could be counted on. Baeom commented that having a role on the team was generally good. They wondered how Dawoon was feeling. Nari set off with him and asked where he was going. He said there was still a lot of fence left, and he wanted to put one on the path too. She chuckled, saying it would be very beautiful, after which Dawoon asked if she'd really made peace with her friends. At that moment, Nari coldly replied, yes, exactly. And had he really been to the coconut tribe? The protagonist replied, of course. Apparently, she was worried that he'd figured out who she was. Nari got scared and said she wanted to tell him, since she wasn't from the coconut tribe at all, but at that moment the protagonist addressed her by name, and said that no one would come for her. He'd settled everything, and here's what he thought. He suggested that they become a coconut tribe themselves? Nari looked at him in confusion and asked what he meant. He replied that they now had a whole family and needed a name. He suggested they call themselves the Coconut Tribe. She burst into tears and asked again, Coconut Tribe? After that, Nari thanked her uncle for this, and he said, okay, they should go. Everyone was probably waiting for them. When Nari walked away, she said that they had returned, and from that day on, they were the Coconut Tribe. Baeom replied that, judging by the look, the conversation had been a success. Jiseok told the master that they had returned, and that they had just finished working on the fence. The house had become even more beautiful. At that moment, the fox cub ran up to Nari. She hugged her, and asked where she had disappeared to without saying anything. Dawoon thought that children don't grow up without fighting. Suddenly, he froze and saw something was wrong. Directly opposite him, Blue appeared, flying straight at him. It, too, pressed itself against the protagonist, embarrassed, and he said he'd really missed him. Although the bird looked large, it was actually such a baby. Suddenly, he noticed feathers on Blue's tail and noted them. Kim, grinning and approaching, said that Blue had been faster. After all, they had just finished treating this creature. The protagonist asked again, did it happen that quickly? Regeneration usually takes longer. Kim replied that he had a little of that red moss left. It was used as an ingredient in a supreme potion, a very powerful restorative, and if directly strengthened, the effect is even stronger. The protagonist replied, yes, of course. A-class is A-class. Kim thanked him for these words, and Ji-seok, watching from the side, became alarmed and asked, so the feathers have already grown back? What kind of miracle is this? He realized he now had a chance, then turned to Kim and whispered, sir, does he by any chance treat baldness? Kim asked again, how did he know about this? He's been developing a cure for baldness for 10 years. Ji-seok's mouth dropped open in amazement and dumbfounded surprise and happiness. All alchemists wanted to uncover this secret. When he finished, he'd give it to him. It was clear it was serious business. Ji-seok fell to his knees and shouted, hooray! If he needed anything, just let him know. He perked up considerably. And Kim turned to Jia and Baeom and said something about their feathers. The protective weaves themselves were very strong, and these in particular, he'd never seen such ancient drawings. If they had a lot of mandrake fruits, perhaps he could find a solution. At that moment, Do-woon was surprised by his words and asked, does he mean those red berries? Kim asked, does he know what mandrake fruits are? Do-woon realized he'd eaten them by the handful before. How could he not know? They'll soon ripen in their garden. He shouted, what? What do you mean? The protagonist replied that he was feeding these little ones. A good guy, that's all he gave them. Kim saw a whole field of the necessary ingredients, and shouted, isn't that a whole bed of mandrake? He'd been healing them from the start, and hadn't even noticed. Mandrake is a monster that absorbs energy, purifies it, creates fruit, and then grows again after eating it. Therefore, these fruits contain the purest energy, but if you pick the fruit by force, it will spoil. For humans, it becomes a powerful poison. So good fruit can only be obtained if the mandrake gives it up itself. They need to add roots to the bed, because they'll come in handy. When the mandrake begins to bear fruit, it hides in burrows or under rocks to escape predators. Kim asked again, how does he know all this? He replied that he'd recently reminisced, since he had old connections with mandrake, so to speak. Once upon a time, Do-woon, being sample number 17, was in the Highland Zone. He stood in front of the portal, watched by laboratory staff who asked if he wanted to survive 10 days alone in the demonic mountains. But what's so difficult about that? On the contrary, there was fresh air there. Since he'd climbed the snowy mountains, he should have conquered the summit. Do-woon continued walking straight into the snow-covered forest. He looked into the distance and asked what that sound was. When he heard it again, he realized what it was. He saw an icy creature and asked, a mandrake? Was someone attacking? When Do-woon approached, he reached out to the mandrake, who suddenly woke up and began screaming loudly. Do-woon remarked that it was a nimble fellow for its size. When the mandrake stepped on its feet, it trembled from pain and cold. Do-woon realized that this existence was in dire straits and would collapse at any moment. Suddenly, he realized, wait, did he really feel sorry for this thing? He squatted down opposite the mandrake and realized it was just a monster. It was made of mana, and this monster's mana made him sleepy. When the mandrake fell asleep, he asked if he could take it with him for a couple of days. That evening, he continued strolling through the forest with the mandrake, who was making funny noises and sitting in his pocket. He approached a cave and said he would spend the night there. When he entered, the mandrake played with him a little. He lit a fire and said he felt better after eating mana. What an active creature it was. He drank some water and suddenly looked questioningly at the mandrake, who was looking at him with a pitiful look. He realized it was probably thirsty too, so he apologized and offered it some mandrake water. He doused the creature from all sides, and Do-woon asked it not to shake, as it would make it harder to give it water. If anyone had seen, they would have definitely thought it was dancing with happiness. Suddenly, the mandrake vanished, and Do-woon asked, what's it doing? He saw a bright glow, and suddenly the mandrake emerged, holding berries. Do-woon asked, where did it get them? The mandrake muttered something in its own language and handed the berries to Do-woon, who was surprised and asked, are they for him? He probably shouldn't have taken the treat from the monster's clutches, but he was still resistant to most poisons, so with mandrake's sincerity, he decided to eat them. When he tried the berries, he felt an incredible taste. It was sweet, aromatic, and even refreshing. He understood that it was filling his entire body. Were the berries really imbued with mana? But what was he doing there? The mandrake trembled, and Do-woon realized the baby was growing berries right on himself. There were 5 of them, and now 6. He handed the berries to Do-woon again, and he asked, but why is he giving them to him? There were even more. Was he trying to repay him for something? Do-woon seemed to be having a hard time. He felt somehow awkward taking more berries. He said that this was enough, because he was full. The mandrake ate the remaining berries, and Do-woon wondered, was it now eating its own fruit? Exactly. There were no seeds here, so it was eating its own fruit to grow, and he was stealing mana for its growth? It seemed he was indebted. At that moment, the mandrake climbed onto his leg, and he was surprised to see it. He was comfortable in that corner of the rock. Why had it climbed closer to him? What was this amazing creature for? Let him sleep soundly. It certainly won't bother him here. While he was sitting in the quiet atmosphere, he noticed something was wrong. Were there monsters in the distance? It looked like they were hunting for berries. After all, they contained pure energy. He thought, well, as long as it was here with him, he would protect the mandrake. He crawled out of the cave straight towards the monster, and noticing the creature approaching, clenched his fist and tossed it aside. Sometime later, he and Mandrake were sitting, laughing and discussing something. When Dawoon looked into the distance at the sunset, he realized it was time for him to return. He needed to adjust to the counterspell the lab had cast on him. Mandrake became upset when he realized what was about to happen, and Dawoon asked, "Is it time for them to say goodbye?" Now he understood why he felt sorry for the creature. It was a lump of material abandoned alone in the snowy wasteland, which probably reminded him of himself back then. If he left, the Mandrake would likely not survive, but he had to go anyway. A spell had been cast on his object, and if he didn't return in time, he would die. And if he took it to their world, it would become a test subject, just like him. It wasn't a better invention, but a kind of protection made of silk thread. And to prevent it from being damaged or torn, he should wear it properly and not lose it. He tied a special thread to the Mandrake's body that would protect it, and the Mandrake smiled and thanked him for it. After Dawoon said he was leaving, the Mandrake ran after him and began screaming loudly. But he suddenly tripped and fell headfirst into the ground. Dawoon turned around and asked it to take care of itself, apologizing for not being able to protect it until the end. At that moment, Mandrake burst into tears so hard that tears and snot began to roll down the creature's face. Hearing this story, Jiseok and Kim hugged and began to sob as well. Biome asked again, "What? Is this the end? What happened next?" The protagonist replied that he returned there 2 weeks later, but apparently there had been a collapse and the cave was gone. He searched the area, but there was no trace. He apologized to Mandrake in a frightened state, and the others began to speculate about what he could have done. Perhaps he had died under the rubble, or even been eaten. Jia added, "But he did give it the silk thread, didn't he? Perhaps it was still alive." Biome confirmed this thought, and suggested returning to those snowy mountains. The protagonist realized that if it had survived, then that would be it. When they returned to the snowy mountains, they were met by a large number of mandrakes under the influence of the same familiar mandrake with the thread. He turned out to be alive and controlling a whole gathering of similar mandrakes. When the protagonist decided to return to the snowy mountains and suggested the rest of the guys do the same, he thought it would be incredible if he actually survived. At that moment, Dawoon turned around and saw several mandrakes looking at him questioningly. Kim approached him and expressed surprise that he'd even set up a garden for them. He really seems to adore mandrakes, doesn't he? Speaking of which, would he mind if he tried giving them mana? He loves mandrakes too, if he didn't know. Dawoon replied that they must have gotten hungry while building the fence. But was he sure about that? And they might be different from those in the human world. Kim grinned and asked if he could try it now. When he approached the mandrakes and reached out his hands, he asked, "Well, will they be good, okay?" He began to think that the managers should be more careful. When they implanted mandrake cells into him, he clearly understood one thing. A healthy mandrake is a true mana drainer. When the mandrake smiled, bright rays of light began to emanate from the creature, and Kim shouted that it was too little. Dawoon understood that they were greedy at home and had already gotten used to the amount he was giving them. Kim backed away and said in a trembling voice that it was too much. A moment later, he breathed a sigh of relief and fell backwards to the ground. Jiseok ran up to him, frightened, and shouted, "Manager Kim, he can't die. Please let him come to his senses." Kim replied that he wouldn't die and laughed at the fact that an A-rank alchemist had been defeated. Nari was distraught over the mandrake's nausea. Dawoon asked, "Do they care about quality over quantity?" How capricious they were. Sometime later in the Golden City, in Congressman Park Woo-jung's office, one of the girls suggested that the research lab was rumored to be under attack. After listening to them, she came to the conclusion that all the money invested in the mechanical beasts simply burned up overnight. This girl's name was Jessica. She is the CEO of the Gold Association. They discussed at a meeting how they intend to compensate for the losses. Violet, who was sitting opposite, is the vice president of the Red Brick Gang. She did not answer and sat silently. Sitting next to them, the chairman of the Golden City Trade Association, Ki Bong, clutching his head, said that this was not all. He had heard that the chairman of the Hunters Association, Lee Eun-soo, had already launched an investigation. If these journalists had seen him, would he have been afraid of the powerful old man? This question was asked by the chairman of the Hunters Association, Jong Hyuk. Ki Bong jumped up from his chair and started shouting, "Chairman, this is rude." He asked again, "But isn't he right? Let the congressman speak about it." Yu John, sitting opposite them, smiled calmly and asked them not to worry, because he would sort everything out. "It looks like some guy from a secret facility has shown up. Misunderstandings happen. It happens from time to time, doesn't it?" He snapped his fingers and asked them not to worry, as they would soon have a new source of income. They had received reports of a large Mandragora settlement in the mountains. Jessica was delighted and asked again, "Mandragora? An entire population?" Jong Hyuk asked again, "But who could even reach the summit of the snowy mountains? Even those of a higher rank avoid it, no matter how much they offered." He replied that they didn't necessarily have to climb to the very peak. The hunters would only make it halfway, and everyone would be A rank. At that point, Ki Bong asked them to stop, as he had said the settlement was at the summit. He didn't quite understand what he meant then. Yujon replied that a single teleporter would help them, which was unprecedented. Not long ago, Bongsu came to the office and said he had come to measure his awakening level. An office employee asked his name, and he turned out to be an incredibly rare awakened one. He clutched his head in embarrassment and said his name was Bongsu. After a while, a whole team of hunters made their way into the snowy mountains. Even though A-rank hunters swarmed the highlands, it felt like a walk in the park. They'd only gotten halfway there, and the monsters were already avoiding them. This was the one, right? The teleporter kid? His jump range was incredible. He was simply exceptional. He was probably near the expedition leader, a key figure on this expedition. He must be well guarded. It was indeed Bongsu, walking nearby in a hood and overhearing these words. People around were discussing how he'd recently awakened, meaning he must be an F rank. How did he get through the gate? He'd have to be at least an A rank to be able to do that. Another guy replied that it was because the expedition leader was an enhancer. He asked again, what? An F rank enhancement would kill him, and the kid agreed to it? His interlocutor asked again, was he even listening? They'd used puppeteer magic on him, and he'd be hypnotized and do whatever he was told. He's a street kid from the slums, and they'd sent him to test his rank. In that case, it wouldn't matter if he died. But was this really a mission from above? Then it's no wonder they were well paid. At that moment, the expedition leader, the amplifier, raised his fist and shouted for everyone to stop. From this distance, they should have succeeded by now. They would begin the mission immediately. The puppeteer grabbed Bongsu by the shoulder, and now a dark aura emanated from Bongsu. He extended his hand into the distance, and those around him were surprised that he was starting, and they decided to see what this exceptional guy was capable of. At that moment, an ominous expression appeared on his face, and very loud sounds emanated from the clearing they were in. Numerous mandrakes suddenly jumped up and began to scatter everywhere. Bongsu stood in anticipation, as did the entire team of hunters. They were amazed that this was actually possible from such a distance. Perhaps due to the enhancement of his rare ability, it was happening, and it looked terrifying. A moment later, Bongsu fell headfirst to the ground and lay motionless. The people around him began to scatter, shouting, "Why are they standing there? Whoever catches the mandrakes with their feathers will be the prey." Numerous hunters rushed after the mandrakes and used their magical powers to capture them in their cages. When the mandrakes were caught and the hunters succeeded, they shouted, "Hurry and prepare to capture." The mandrakes were unable to escape their cages, when suddenly the leader, the very same acquaintance of the protagonist, climbed onto one of the rocks and confidently called upon his army of mandrakes to fight the enemy and free their allies. People began shouting, "Wait, is that the one in the center giving orders? Is that the leader of the pack?" The mandrakes rushed straight for the net. It's gnawing at the net. No, it's draining his mana. At this rate, the light network will be broken. They're all rank A, and these mandrakes are making them look like fools. They seem to be quite powerful at absorbing mana. At that moment, the expedition leader developed veins on his body and shouted that he was an awakened being who didn't use mana. Everyone was shocked as the mandrakes continued to break free from their networks. The pack leader shouted orders to the others so they could escape. When the hunter leader approached the mandrake leader, he asked, "So that means he's the pack leader?" He would crush him, but he was too valuable. He would beat him, but not to death. At that moment, he swung his sword to destroy the mandrake's leader, when the protagonist suddenly managed to save him and said, "Stop swinging your sword around." He struck his opponent with such force that he was sent flying, and the impact was so strong that a lot of dust appeared around him. Everyone around him began to wonder, who is this guy? They didn't know who it was and hadn't seen him before. Could the information have leaked to the competitors? But that was a direct order from above. That simply couldn't be true. At that moment, Dawoon commented on how noisy they all were. A dark aura began to emanate from him, frightening those around him, causing them to scream and fall to the ground. The mandrake leader saw his acquaintance and, with tears in his eyes, said something to him in his own language. Meanwhile, Baeom, who had been watching from afar, said, "A whole crowd of hunters descended upon them?" Jia answered, "Exactly. And why are there so many mandrakes here?" Suddenly they both froze, and Jia asked, "Is that really him?" Dawoon replied, "Yes, it is." And at that moment, the mandrake's body began to shake. That was the same silk thread he had tied around his neck. How old was he? 15. His clothes were different, and he was much shorter. The mandrake rushed into his arms, tears streaming down his face, and when the protagonist caught it in his arms, it tensed. It became embarrassed and continued to cry in his arms, and Dawoon thought the creature looked just like a puppy. At that moment, Dawoon looked ahead in surprise and saw a huge number of mandrakes approaching him with upset expressions. Dawoon asked again, "Are these friends?" At that moment, the mandrake leader ran out of his arms and spoke a word in his own language. The other mandrakes supported him and also began to talk. Dawoon realized that he had really become the leader of his flock. At that moment, his whole body shook, and he asked, "Is he standing on tiptoe? Was he trying to appear taller?" He had already learned to express himself, and he was still the same. At that moment, Jia and Beom descended the mountain, and he continued to say that they would see him again. Beom confirmed that he was indeed following the same thread. Who would have thought he was alive? Beom asked. So, now he'll be raising him in his garden too? Do-eun scratched his head and replied that he didn't mind the garden, but if he had already found his friends, he himself wouldn't want to part with them. It was better to let them go now than to be disappointed later. Beom asked again, what should they do with those? It looked like they had come for the mandrakes. Do-eun noted that this was true. They needed to drive them away. At that moment, he turned around and was stunned by what he saw. It was Bong-su, lying unconscious in the snow. When he grabbed his body and lifted him, he asked what he was doing here. Beom asked again, did they know each other? He was still just a child. What was he doing in the demon world? Do-eun replied that he had recently shown him the way in the slums. But had he really awakened? His condition was very bad. Jia confirmed that this energy was terrible. He was a teleporter and had awakened only recently. The mark on his hand was an enhancement. One line meant 1 day. He had just under 3 days left to live. A moment later, Do-eun realized what had happened. Everything became clear to him. If the mana mixed with Bong-su's was identical, then the enhancer was the guy on the right, whom he saw in front of him, but next to him was their puppet. They needed the mandrakes, but they didn't dare climb to the top of the snowy mountains. Is that why they kidnapped a child who had just awakened? He felt this terrifying aura and knew they couldn't handle him. Do-eun looked at them terrifyingly, and the leader realized he couldn't even estimate his level. He spoke in a trembling voice, asking him to listen, saying that if he wanted mandrakes too, he would hand him some. After these words, the protagonist became enraged and struck him with incredible force, creating a deep pit beneath them. Do-eun remarked that they all looked like A rank, but he only had one question. If he let a 17-year-old boy through the gate, what was he thinking? Surely it was something along the lines of, he's an orphan from the slums, and they'll use him and throw him away, right? They've probably already divided the money. Yes, in this world the law of force rules. They may not have committed a mortal sin, but then he could do the same to them, right? Well, he suggests just a little fight, not to the death. After some time, the mandrakes lined up, and the protagonist placed Bong-su on a large rock. He sat silently next to him, looking at him, thinking about how he met Bong-su. When he saw him, he asked why he wore these things on his hands and feet. He replied that this bracelet boosted his stamina and that he wanted to become as strong as him. Do-eun was surprised and asked again, as he. Bong-su confirmed that he entered the demon realm with nothing and was probably a very strong hunter. He also wanted to become that strong, so he ate a lot and trained hard. He said that he wanted to become a strong hunter and should hold out a little longer, and then he would definitely save him. At that moment, Bong-su's whole body shook, and he opened his mouth to inhale more air when suddenly Do-eun heard a loud cry from their saviors. He turned around and realized they had arrived. It was Jia, along with Kim, who was shouting Bong-su's name very loudly and approaching him. A moment later, he tripped and fell face first into the snow. Do-eun looked at him in bewilderment, and when Kim stood up, he asked why he was in the demon world. Do-eun said the details would come later. First, he needed to see if he could be cured. After a while, Kim tensed up and cast a magical seal over Bong-su's body. He looked down sadly and replied that it was no longer a matter of healing. He had expended too much life force. Now, even if he doused him with the best potions, it would be useless. Why had this poor boy fallen for such a trick? The protagonist wondered. Was this life force? Perhaps he had a way. Kim asked again. What? But what? The protagonist pointed to the seal he had drawn in the snow and said it should work. He had scanned it a long time ago. Kim asked again. This is an ancient transmutation circle, right? It extracts mana and converts it into life force. But artificially extracting mana is extremely dangerous and prohibited by the state. Furthermore, it would require a colossal amount of fog. They would likely have to extract the mana of all the hunters present, and they had no guarantee of survival if they failed. At that moment, Do-eun told him to extract his mana. Kim was dumbfounded by this and asked fearfully, what did he say? Do-eun replied that it was fine. He'd done it once before. He didn't want to remain indebted to such freaks for his life. He recalled being surrounded by lab technicians discussing how Subject 17's mana output exceeded the standard and was effectively unmeasurable. If they harnessed this subject's nearly infinite mana, they would create the first ever life-extending transmutation circle. Do-eun laughed at these words, then blew up several offices and the lab technicians jumped out the window. He hadn't liked the researchers' motives back then, so he destroyed everything. But the circle itself had been flawlessly crafted. At that moment, he took off his shirt, revealed his muscular torso, and asked, so should they start right now? Kim approached him from behind, used his magical powers, and said he was now beginning to extract his mana. He pressed the magic circle to his back and thought, poor Bong-su. If only for Mr. Do-eun's sake, he must do this at any cost. Everything around him glowed with bright magical energy, and a wondrous orb appeared on the protagonist's back. Kim was puzzled that life force was actually materializing. He was delighted and realized that all that remained was to convey it to Bong-su. A moment later, there was a bright pop and mandrakes surrounded Kim. He asked in a trembling voice, what's with those guys around you? The protagonist thought they seemed to think he was attacking him. At that moment, the mandrakes began to bite him from different sides, and Kim shouted that they had misunderstood and that he was asking them to calm down. His mandrake was trying so hard to protect him, but he still had to let him go home. At that moment, Kim continued to scream for help so he could save him. A moment later, Kim prepared the liquid and poured a few drops into Bongsu's mouth. All the guys were waiting when suddenly the mark on his hand began to disappear. Kim noted that his breathing had returned to normal, and he shouted that they had succeeded. Their Bongsu would live. And all this thanks to him, Dowoon. Beom said that it was even strange. Dowoon rubbed the back of his head and replied, yes. Who would have thought that a lab experiment would help him save a person one day? Even such things happen in life. Kim said that he still needed to take the medicine and regain his strength. As soon as he started, he would take him to his place and keep an eye on him. Beom replied, but how would they get through the gate? The seal had already been removed. Dowoon replied that he shouldn't worry. He would set up a protective barrier for them and could do it right now. And he thought of something else. Manager Kim was right. This technique was an alchemical seal long banned by the state. Using it to extend lifespan could easily cross the line between good and evil. So, as soon as they extracted the mana from the hunters, he would erase their memories. Kim scratched his head and replied that he understood everything. It was really best for no one to know about such terrifying seals, when suddenly he screamed loudly in realization. Wait, extracting the hunter's mana? Dowoon replied, yes. In the same way, let them pay for turning a blind eye to what was happening. They still needed the gate, so they demote him to Class D. It was a waste of mana anyway. Beom thought about it. This was typical Dowoon, no doubt. But he wouldn't let them go easily, would he? Kim asked again. Maybe they should at least fix their memories. At that moment, Jia sat next to their amplifier, silently watching him as he lay head down. Dowoon said no, he'd let them go this time. People don't change with a snap of the finger. Let them follow their father's example and suddenly stop sinning. Perhaps Beom replied that since that was his decision, so be it. The protagonist considered simply silencing them all, though, on second thought, he felt bad about letting them go so easily. At that moment, an idea occurred to him. He asked if they could build a laboratory here themselves. Beom asked again, did he want to build a laboratory in the icy mountains? Dowoon replied, yes, a D-class could last another couple of days. A personal laboratory for Manager Kim, why not? Kim was incredibly happy and blushed with embarrassment, clenching his fists in hope. He asked, is his personal lab in the netherworld? He'd get everything ready right away. With these words, he ran away from the guys, and Dowoon watched him go, thinking that they could burden him more often in the lab, because he was tired of wandering into the human world. The hunters wouldn't sit idly by when they started extracting mana, so he'd have to keep an eye on them. Beom said that wasn't a problem, but where did he want to go? Dowoon reached into his pocket and pulled out a mandrake, which lay peacefully in his hands. He said he needed to take this guy home. After a while, he used blue, which landed on the snowy ground, and when Dowoon approached, he asked him to wait a minute. He grabbed his bag, which contained many mandrakes, and opened it. The mandrakes ran out and scattered in all directions. Dowoon remarked that they were having fun. Whether he was human or monster didn't matter. Everyone would be happy to return home. The mandrake leader was smiling as he sat on the protagonist's shoulder when he suddenly picked him up, and the mandrake looked ahead, questioningly. When he released him, he realized it was time for them to say goodbye. He couldn't carry him around as their leader just because it was convenient. The mandrake turned to him, puzzled, and returned to his arms. Dowoon replied that they weren't saying goodbye forever, and that he, too, now lived in the underworld, and they would visit them from time to time. At that moment, the mandrake extended its hand and ran off into the distance. The protagonist turned and asked where he had gone. He looked upset and answered something, and Dowoon asked again, is he inviting him along? Dowoon followed, wondering if this was the opposite side from their lair. When they reached the special place, the mandrake made a new sound, and Dowoon asked again, is this where it is? They entered the cave, and he realized it was almost like that other cave. It wasn't abandoned, it was even clean, and the tracks showed it was often walked here. Was there the same crevice where he grew berries? At that moment, the mandrake pointed to that crevice, and he was delighted when Dowoon asked, did he find this place himself? At that moment, he turned and saw the mandrakes approaching them. He asked, are they looking for their leader? One of them, a mustachioed mandrake, looked at the leader. They exchanged glances in silence, and at that moment, the leader removed his headband and handed it to the new, mustachioed leader. Old Mandrake was overjoyed and embarrassed, but the previous leader confidently handed him the headband. The protagonist realized, had he really handed over his power for this man, but was he really sure of it? Mandrake looked away silently and didn't answer, then shed tears and confirmed these words. After some time, they lit a fire in the cave and sat together. Dowoon smiled and said that he understood everything. Everyone chooses where to live. He looked at the sky from which snow was falling, and he understood that if this is what he wanted, then everything was fine. After some time, Bongsu, lying on the stone, began to stir. He opened his eyes and asked, what the hell is that? Beom, wearing a terrifying mask, looked at him, causing Bongsu to become very frightened. Realizing what was happening, he exclaimed loudly and jumped up. Jia and Beom noted that he recovered quickly. He looked ahead in bewilderment and asked, is that a monster? At that moment, Jia said, "Welcome to the underworld, boy." He realized where they were and was dumbfounded. After some time, Bongsu turned and looked into the distance. Jia reasoned that he was still dissatisfied. She hoped it wasn't because of them. Baeom confirmed that this was probably his first time here, and that he was a baby who had returned from death. No wonder he was in shock. Bongsu stared silently at the floor. Remembering how the office worker had told him he'd been awakened, he'd been very surprised, and she'd congratulated him on the occasion. After that, he'd run out of the office and realized his sister was right. He really wanted to tell her. But before he could even run out of the office, one of the hooded guys called out to him in the hallway and asked, "Is he another awakened?" Bongsu replied, "Yes, but who was he?" The guy had mentioned that he had the ability to teleport, hadn't he? He was congratulating him because he was now a hunter candidate, and he could call him senior. At that moment, he'd thrown a soda into his hands, and Bongsu looked at him in confusion. The boy explained that it was an introductory drink and that he should drink it down to the bottom, as it was good for his mana. Bongsu was delighted and thanked his elder, then drank the drink. At this point, he gritted his teeth in anger and realized that this was how it should have been. What kind of hunter was he? He was a street kid from the slums, after all. He felt very sorry for him, thinking about his sister Pak, clutching his head and nearly sobbing on a rock. Meanwhile, the protagonist was returning with Blue and Mandrake, who was sitting in his t-shirt. Dawoon looked to the side and saw someone carrying huge logs, and he realized they had already begun construction on the lab. When he landed, Baeom asked, "Have you arrived yet?" Dawoon asked, "Have they squeezed the mana out of them yet?" Baeom said they had done everything quickly. They got bored of keeping them idle, so they started construction. Some of them were hauling materials, while others were leveling the platform and raising the frame. He thought they'd resist when they started extracting mana, and they were lucky to have come to their senses in time. Baeom blurted out that Jia was the one handling them. She was sitting on the back of one of them, treating them like slaves, calling them idiots. They started talking, and one of the hunters asked, "That boy from the slums almost died?" And they immediately started draining him of mana, and all the way to Class D? He actually had to work for 20 years to get to Class A, and all he wanted was to collect money. So, why is he getting all this? Kim ignored him completely, and continued extracting mana. When he collapsed on the floor, exhausted, Baeom said it was the next man's turn. The guys discussed whether they were really going to sit back and do nothing. His partner asked, "What's he offering him?" There were 2 disaster-level monsters here, but that Alphonse had vanished from sight. They were also A-class. And if they got together, but before he could finish his sentence, Jia kicked him in the head, causing his nose to bleed. She became very angry and asked again, "Together what?" After a while, she calmed down a bit, and Baeom noted her difficult personality. Kim silently watched the proceedings and said nothing. Jia said that they should all listen to her. She might not understand some things, but she would fight for her people. Did they catch everything she said? Jia stood confidently in front of the destroyed opponents and told them not to mess with her. Let them decide now. Will they give up in a good way, or will they be destroyed? She looked so terrifying that the guys said they would obediently give her mana. At that moment, Jia turned around and screamed. Who said rest? That way, they wouldn't make it until tomorrow. Dawoon looked at her with a smile and said that Jia was really scary like that. The guys apologized to her immediately, even though they had a lot of bruises on their heads from her blows. Baeom said that at this rate, they'd finish everything quickly. Maybe they could leave the lab to them? Dawoon replied, yes, they know how to build, so he was counting on them. At that moment, Kim approached Dawoon and said he was back, and mana had been disposed of. Dawoon thanked him for his work and then asked how Bongsu was. Kim scratched his head and replied that he had recently woken up and was already recovering, only he looked depressed. Did he want to talk to him? Dawoon was stunned by what he heard and said nothing. A moment later, he approached Bongsu and asked him from behind, "So, he's already woken up?" Bongsu turned around and was surprised. "That's Dawoon, right?" He didn't answer. "Yes, let him drop everything and not complicate things," addressing him informally. Dawoon considered his appearance and realized his bangs had sagged. Was that because he was near death? And his mana core had grown. Was that because of him? He would have to find out. At that moment, Dawoon asked why he looked so strange. He had brought him back to life, and he seemed unhappy. Bongsu lowered his head and replied that he simply felt like he was no good for anything. Sister Pak believed in him, gave him money for the trip, but he, like a fool, trusted the first person he met and now doesn't know how to live. With these words, he began to sob, and after a moment of silence, Dawoon called his name and asked him to come with him. At that moment, the hunters, who had overheard this conversation, turned around in surprise. The protagonist approached them and grabbed one of them, a man with strange-looking glasses, and asked, "Is that him?" At that very second, he punched the guy and broke his glasses. He flew off to the side, and Dawoon asked, he approached him, told him lies, and cast a puppet spell, right? If he wants, he can kill him for it. What will he say? Bongsu approached him while the boy shook with fear and said nothing. He lowered his hand and said, "No, that's not necessary. He's alive. This guy's exhausted. What's the point? People like him will appear, and they'll be found everywhere. He needs to get stronger so no one will dare treat him like that again." Dawoon smiled and confirmed these words, then told the boy to go to work, because he was alive thanks to Bongsu. The man stood up, covered in blood, and uttered words of gratitude, after which Do-eun said, Bongsu, he'll start with mana training with manager Kim. Bongsu was stunned, and Kim, grabbing his shoulder, said, yes, he's from the slums too, and he'll help him. Beom asked again, so what? He's from the slums too, and he's not ashamed of it. Jia chuckled at how comforting his face didn't seem to work. Bongsu burst into tears after such strong support and words. He thanked all the guys and hugged manager Kim. Do-eun smiled and thought that if he was properly trained, he would be even more powerful than Jiseok. At that moment, the mandrake in his pocket rejoiced at the situation. Beom noticed this and asked, did he really bring that mandrake back? Did this creature really have a new thread? The protagonist replied, yes, he simply passed on the previous thread to another mandrake. It seemed the thread somehow represented a leader. The one who accepted it became the new leader, and he took this mandrake for himself. Jia asked again, did the monster voluntarily hand over power to him? She'd never heard of this before. Do-eun replied that he wanted to come to the forest lands and show this little guy his home. Beom replied, okay, he needn't worry about the lab and say hello to Nari and the workers. He replied that he would pass on everything, and, a moment later, rushed off with Blue to the right place. Bongsu watched him go, thinking that he'd come out of nowhere, helped him, and now even saved his life. What kind of person was he? At that moment, Beom turned to him, calling him a weirdo, and Bongsu asked, what? He replied that he had nothing, which meant he had nothing to lose. And since he had nothing to lose, he had nothing to fear. Since he'd been used his whole life, this weirdo decided to build a house far away from everyone in the demon world and live peacefully. After some time, the protagonist arrived at Jiseok, Nari, and the other monsters. He didn't understand what all the noise was about. After that, he raised his hand, waving to his friends and asked, is everyone okay? Jiseok turned around in surprise and shouted, Do-eun. Nari also turned around and asked, Uncle, why did it take him so long to get to her? There were tears in her eyes, and Do-eun asked, what happened? She shouted that Gu and Sasa were missing. Do-eun was stunned and asked again, what? Nari replied that they hadn't been seen since morning, and that she and her uncle had searched everywhere. They'd been wandering through the forest, shouting, where are they? They should go eat. They weren't at the waterfall, and they hadn't been found in the forest either. Do-eun's gaze grew sad, and he pondered what was happening. He saw no signs of an intruder, and sensed no alien aura. Was anything unusual happening? Jiseok paused, and replied that he felt awkward, as if he were snitching, but Sasa had gone off to fight Mandragora again and lost again. It had been 4 fights and 4 defeats, and when he wasn't around, he was always picking fights. Recently, Sasa had even climbed a sapling and gotten his own back. He seemed to have gotten angry and then spent the whole day sleeping. Nari noted that Sasa was definitely sleeping all the time lately. Do-eun wondered if he was sleeping at every opportunity. Could this really be happening to him? But isn't it too early for him to start molting? A few hours ago, Gu was flapping his wings and suddenly wondered what that sound was. He looked down and saw Sasa and realized that just by his gait, something was wrong. Sasa had picked up his act again, approaching the plants. Every chance he gets, he tries to pull out the mandrake's leaves. Could today mean he's after the younger one again? At that moment, the mandrake laughed, and Sasa rolled back in fear. All the mandrakes woke up, and Sasa found himself surrounded by them. His courage was commendable, but he was no match for them. They were too strong. Sasa was terrified when he saw the terrifying faces of the mandrakes, who began attacking him moments later. When the fight broke out, Sasa rolled over several times and ended up with his head in the ground. Sasa began to cry and tremble with anger, when suddenly she saw a petal in front of her. Gu approached it and asked, there's plenty of grass around, so why does he need that? Sasa continued to circle the flower, and Gu told him to eat it as he'd chosen the one with the most mana. When Sasa had eaten his fill, he was delighted. Gu asked again, is this how he feels when a worker cooks for him? At that moment, he froze and asked why his skin was bulging. Was he really about to molt? Molting is an ordeal no easier than hatching. If the temperature and humidity aren't right, he could die without shedding his shell, and there's no way to help him directly. Any outside contact during the molt could cause an unwanted mutation. At that moment, Sasa rose to his feet and made a strange sound. Gu realized that, judging by everything, his molt would begin soon, but he was too small and might not have the strength to shed his shell. He needed to move him to a suitable location immediately. After a while, Gu rose into the air and began screaming in terror. Is anyone here? Jiseok, meanwhile, was tending the garden and filling a bucket with water. Nari was also minding her own business, running through the forest. Gu wondered where everyone was. He needed to take Sasa to a warm, damp place immediately. After a moment, he realized he wouldn't even be able to explain this to Nari or the workers. He wondered when Do-eun would return. Sasa, meanwhile, looked at him questioningly, and Gu said there was nothing they could do. He picked up Sasa and said he would have to carry him to the right place himself. Gu continued to drag Sasa, and it was already dark. Gu thought it was just a small cave behind the mountain, and how many times along the way had he come close to death. By the time he saved Sasa, he himself could die. When he found a convenient spot, he landed and set Sasa on his feet, saying that this was a good place. Suddenly, he heard a loud scream and froze in terror. A multitude of bats were approaching them, and Gu screamed. Where did they come from? The bats were magical monsters approaching the frightened Gu and Sasa. Gu grabbed Sasa in his wings and shouted him not to be afraid, as he would protect him. Moments later, there was a bright flash of light, and it turned out that Do-woon had found them on his own. Gu and Sasa were surprised by his arrival, and Gu asked how he found them. Do-woon replied that he did it by mana. He was surprised, saying that the forest was huge and searching by mana was very difficult. He replied that at such a distance, it was possible, and besides, he knew them from Sasa's aura. Judging by the shell, he really will molt soon. Gu confirmed this and said that Sasa was now safe. Did he want to choose a place where it would be more convenient for him to molt? At that moment, Sasa hid behind a rock, and Do-woon asked again, "Do you like it here? The humidity here is just right, though it's cool. Maybe he should raise the temperature?" He stuck his hand deep into the stone, and Gu said it was warm and good, almost like a volcanic zone. But do such little creatures molt? He barely grew at all. This looks like a type of accelerated evolution in species. Do-woon asked again, "Accelerated evolution?" Gu replied, "Yes, molting for monsters is a struggle for survival. The demon world is a place where everyone fights for their own lives, and he lost to Mandragora time and again." Surely he realized that this couldn't go on. This survival instinct triggered accelerated evolution. Does this mean he'll become even stronger after molting? Gu noted that he thought so. Plus he's a rare species, and no one knows what he'll be like after molting. Do-woon remarked, "Sasa, I'm curious what will come of this." A moment later, a bright light appeared in their room, and Gu froze and asked again, "What is that?" Do-woon was also stunned and opened his mouth in amazement. From that very crack in the stone, a huge flower appeared, which grew from Sasa's head, and he emerged from the stone delighted and uttered a phrase in his own language. Q asked what kind of flower it was. The protagonist, looking at the plant, said that it looked worth observing, but first they should return home. Sometime later at Do-woon's house, Nari ran up to him and shouted anxiously, "Where has he been? If he's leaving, he should at least say where." Q flew ahead and shouted, "There's no way to reason with her." She ran after him, and next to the protagonist was Jiseok, who said how lucky they were found. He looked at him and asked, "Is Sasa really okay?" He nodded and replied that he would understand in time. He was probably tired after molting, so he should sleep for now. Jiseok said that when he wakes up, he should prepare some bait for him. Then MC heard a sound behind him and said, "Exactly." He looked at the mandrakes and, dropping to one knee, began releasing energy into the ground. He's been letting them down lately. Give them some mana. Then another mandrake appeared from his pocket, and he said they had a new friend. The others looked on happily. He thought, well, it looks like they've welcomed him warmly. He was worried they'd start fighting for the leader's spot with this one. Then he held the mandrake out to the others and asked, "So, how's it going? This is his garden now, too. Do you like it?" He thought the youngest was the happiest of all. Then he was surprised, thinking the little one didn't want to get off him at all. The mandrake hugged his hand. He wondered if he should buy a carrier. Then Jiseok approached him, scratched his head, and asked if this was the new mandrake. He answered, "He told you so." Yes, the one they'd long ago forgotten. He'd stumbled across it by chance in the snowy mountains. He replied, "Wow, meeting after so long is a real fateful coincidence." Then the protagonist looked ahead in surprise, and Nari said, "Uncle, in her opinion, he simply adores him, so he will have to carry him with him and take care of him. He is just like a baby, so he needs to be patted." He asked, "What?" And she asked, "Does he not know what patting means?" Then she began to stroke Q and said, "Like this, when you lay a baby down, you pat him with the palm of your hand." Q shouted, "Stop." She has to take her hands off his head, and MC looked at the mandrake in his hands and thought, Doduk, maybe I should call him that. Doduk? At that moment, Gia flew up to them and asked, "Is everything okay?" Nari, noticing her, shouted, "Aunt Sparrow." She asked, "Is the lab finished yet?" Jiseok, blushing from the displacement, thought, "Gia." He bowed and shouted, "Gia." He hopes she's been doing well. She replied, "Yeah, right, chef." They hadn't seen each other in a while, and Jiseok started replaying her words in his head over and over again. His eyes lit up with excitement. He clenched his fists and thought, Jiseok, no matter what, he'll get his chef's certificate. Then Gia said they'd already finished the lab, so she'd come to show them around. The protagonist asked, "Really? They were fast." Then Jiseok shouted, "The lab Gia built." He wanted to see it too. Nari agreed, right? And so did she. And the protagonist said, "But Sasa's shedding now. They needed to keep an eye on his condition, and it was already late. Maybe they should go tomorrow?" The others agreed, and Jiseok shouted that in that case, he'd cook a delicious dinner. Nari said she'd pick out some warm clothes for tomorrow. As night fell, Gia occupied a tree branch and then looked at the flower beds in surprise. The mandrakes had gathered around Sasa and were reaching for the plant on his head, and then one of the mandrakes lifted him above its head, while the others dug a hole. After that, they planted Sasa in the ground. He tried to jump at them in response, but he couldn't move and became frightened. At that moment, MC approached him and asked, "So that's why he changed so much?" Nari stood nearby and asked, "Uncle, why did he become a flower pot?" He put his hands on his waist and said, "It looks like he disguised himself as a plant to get close to the mandrakes." Jia descended to them and said that the mandrakes had also planted him. Sasa made an irritated noise, and Q shouted, "Enough, why is he eating this?" And the protagonist asked, "Is it so offensive?" "Then he'll get it. They should go to bed." After a while, everyone had dressed in warm clothes, and Nari exclaimed, "Wow, this is amazing." They approached a tall building, and Jisiok was surprised. "They designed this themselves?" Nari ran ahead, and the protagonist said, "It's well made." She said, "Uncle, there's even a handle on the door. Will they go with Auntie to take a look inside?" Then Bayom approached the protagonist and said that he and Jia were construction pros. He folded his arms and replied, "Yes, it turned out great." He thought that now they could lift the curse from the guys and get down to serious business. At that moment, Manager Kim ran up to them, holding out his hand, and said, "They're already here." He was just returning with materials and equipment from their world. The protagonist asked if Bongsu had returned yet. He would like to introduce Nari to him. He replied, "Yes, he's at their house." The recovery was going well, and they had even started training. Then the MC nodded and said, "Great then." He looked at the kneeling men and asked, "All that's left is to send all the guys back?" "First, Manager Kim, he needs to cast a silencing spell. He'll handle the rest." He replied that he understood. The protagonist added, "Let the spell work, even if they just think about telling anyone about what happened here." At that moment, Jiseok, watching them, thought, "Wait, what? Just a silencing spell?" Then he raised his hand and said, "That's too ancient a spell. They learned how to remove it a long time ago." The protagonist told him not to worry. He'll make it so it's impossible to remove. He was surprised. "What? Is that possible?" He replied, "Perfectly." Meanwhile, Park Woo-jung looked at his desk and asked, "Did dozens of A-rank hunters return as D-rank hunters? And how did that even happen, Mr. Ko Jung-hyuk?" The National Assembly member looked at him and asked, "Has no one been able to remove the silencing spell from them? Does he even realize how absurd that is?" The chairman of the Free Hunters Association, Jung-hyuk, looked up at him and asked if he remembered the silent spell incident 57 years ago. It was happening again. Someone had sealed the mana spell, and it couldn't be removed. Woo-jung wondered if that was the same incident 57 years ago. Then he said it seemed to have something to do with Chairman Lee Un-soo, since the technique that Director Han Myung-do would seal was also considered obsolete. Right? According to an insider, Chairman Un-soo seemed to know whoever had ignited the TDA lab. Woo-jung thought, nonsense. Obsolete. They just messed something up. Although, maybe this was a chance to get rid of Un-soo. Then he said it couldn't be helped. They'd start the slum cleanup project earlier than planned.